This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Fem-Naruto Awaken explosion released during 3 years training trip. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Azumo asked slowly, his brow furrowed in perplexity. So, you're telling me that the Jinchuriki of Kyuubi no Kitsune, the savior of this village, is a girl? On that lovely spring day, Katetsu, the other of the two guards on duty at the open gates to Konohagakure no Sato, made a sound halfway between a sigh and a gnash and put his palm to his face in exasperation. For what seemed like the squintillionth time that day, he explained, "Listen, you were hit with some kind of memory altering genjutsu, and it altered key details in your memory, okay? You just have to get used to the fact that some things are different from what you remember." The question was, like what? Katetsu gave him a stern look in response. He shook his head firmly to get it out. Obviously the gender of the main character. I mean hero. Hero of Konoha. But other than their gender, what would have changed? Alright, allow me to make fun of you, Katetsu sighed once more. How about the rest of Team 7? The Haruno girl and that traitor scum Uchiha. Well, Naruto, what Naruko was called, was in love with Haruno-chan, who was in love with Sasuke, and Naruto had this fierce rivalry with Uchiha, while Hitaki Senpai was pretty apathetic about it all. Wait. His pupils widened, don't tell me. He raised a finger to scratch beneath the bandage covering the bridge of his nose and the middle of his face, saying, no, that isn't reversed here. But things are more complicated. Sasuke and Naruko Chan had this rivalry you speak of, but as far as I can tell Sakura-san considered Naruko Chan an enemy for most of their time together, and Naruko Chan didn't seem to love her. She just ignored the girl, for the most part, I think. Azumo nodded, a little dejected. I see. One of Naruto's more charming traits in the reality he was accustomed to was his unrequited and unrelenting devotion to the Tsunade disciple. But the Uchiha? Katetsu continued, scowling deeply as a queasy feeling settled in his stomach. At their fight at the Valley of the End, only Hokage Sama knows what really happened, but it had to be something bad. Naruko Chan just wasn't the same after that happened. She said she was glad that the Uchiha was gone, for she said she wanted nothing to do with a village that kept, and I quote, people like that sick bastard, in high regards. The last few words of that question lingered on Azumo's tongue as he wondered, did he? The thought was too terrible to express. The two were talking when a sharp clearing of a voice interrupted them. I don't know. Maybe that's best, but I can tell you this. Whatever it was that made Naruko Chan so sad, the traitor deserves to die for it. The two looked up from their sentry dot box at the immediate inside of the gates and saw two strangers. Katetsu complained, if you gossip about someone, their shadow will show up, as Azumo gazed. He got up and bowed, saying, Naruko Chan, Jiraiya Sama. I see that you've changed your hair, welcome back. Yeah. Uzumaki Naruko shrugged her slim shoulders. Her hair, which had been styled in two pigtails high on the sides of her head, was now flowing freely and wavy down her elegant spine. Halfway down its waist length, it was tied together with a single silk band. Her build appeared to have matured and become much curvier and slender all at once, with her skin still tanned to a brilliant contrast with her bright blue eyes. She was still short and somewhat stocky, but she had grown taller than she had been before, if not significantly. Her clothing, however, was what stood out the most about her. A pair of orange fatigue pants with white linen wrappings over both knees and a black sleeveless top cut so that it exposed her entire midriff covered in fishnet armor mesh had replaced the jumpsuit she had always worn as a child. Her name was written in fierce and burning kanji on the back of the short, sleeved red coat she wore over it all. The coat had a black flame pattern along the hemline that extended nearly to her sandal-clad feet. She had a smug grin on her lips and her Hittite was tied around her forehead, polished to a mirror sheen. What about it? With dark and deep rings under his eyes, Jiraiya sighed from next to his pupil, couldn't you talk more womanly, for just once? His skin was paler than usual, as though he had not gotten enough sleep to keep him energized, and he appeared exhausted, with the skin hanging looser on his body than before. Just once? For me? She rolled her eyes at him and turned back to face the two guards, saying, shut up, Arrow. Senin. She turned to Azumo and asked, what are you staring at, perv? Without even attempting to clarify what he meant, Katetsu apologized on behalf of his friend and went on to the topic at hand, saying, don't be too harsh on him. He thought you were a guy. Papers, please. With a glare at Azumo, she said, yeah, whatever. She then handed the sentry Jiraiya's identification and a small scroll that she had taken out of one of the pouches in the black utility belt that was fastened around her narrow waist. Inuzuka Jiraiya. Sama of the Sanin, Jonin, with apprentice Uzumaki Naruko, Genin, Kotetsu examined their documents, then took out a stamp and ink, marking the already filthy edges of both of their scrolls with the Konoha seal in red ink. He said, "Welcome home," with a smile and a bow, and they accepted them silently before leaving with only a wave. He glanced at his friend, who was still gaping at the now empty air, and then slapped him on the back of the head with a growl. "Idiot." As they walked into town, Jiraiya asked his student in a low voice, his tone solemn and his expression hard, "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" He had known the girl he now considered a granddaughter for 3 years, and he was well acquainted with her moods. He could see the tension in her eyes and knew that her smirk was fake, even though she was silent and appeared to walk easily and carelessly. As a shudder passed through her, she allowed her smile to turn into a snarl. "Everyone keeps talking about that bastard. Atbeo. Always they talk about him, even now." Jiraiya firmly informed her as they left, their voices low enough to discourage anyone who might have wanted to listen. "No, they were talking about you and about how they acknowledge you. They spoke out of concern for you. And their adoration of the Uchiha brat turned to hatred long ago." "Sure." She snorted, exhausting that topic firmly, and no longer wanted to talk about it. He knew she had to, though. His gentle question, "Do you hate him?" caused those sarcastic remarks from 3 years prior to resurface in her mind, as they frequently did in her nightmares. "You shameful whore, I'll force you to bear my children." "No," she said reluctantly and slowly, pushing the memories from her thoughts. "I don't. I can't hate him, because I understand him, and in a different time, a different world, he could be me." She had always known, deep down, that she had been born into that body at that time in that village to be his opposite. Light and dark, good and evil, love and hate, yin and yang. Everything in the world had a counterpart. "But I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive him." Jiraiya addressed her in a way that suggested it was acceptable to cry, to be angry, to scream, and to howl at the sky. For what he said, for what he almost did, I would have hated him. She detested it. The sage didn't know everything, so she shrugged and said, "He didn't rape me or anything, and, well, I don't." Some secrets, after all, belonged to her alone. Without further ado, she bounded away, jumping up onto the rooftops of Konoha before sprinting to the top of a flagpole. "You know what? I think I'll go up ahead, see if I can see any of my friends around here somewhere." Jiraiya shook his head pitifully below, then turned to face the distant Hokage tower and walked there, his head hanging down. He had a lot of news to share with Tsunade, but not all of it was positive. Meanwhile, Naruko looked down at the village below with a widening smile, forgetting the past as she saw her home for the first time in a long time. She threw her arms wide and closed her eyes in a smile as she embraced the summer wind, and the great faces carved into the far mountains seemed to smile at her as the sun warmed her back through her coat. She felt joy bubble up in her breasts from her anger from before she forgot. She yelled, "Everyone, into the village. Uzumaki Naruko has returned. Yosh." A voice squealed from below, "Naruko. Nisan." She glanced down at the ground and saw a small group of people running toward her. She looked at the 3 who ran at her first with cries of, "Oyabun," and "Onisan," as she leapt down in a single leap and landed on her feet with feline grace, grinning foolishly. "Konohamaru. Moegi. Udon." She cried out as the 3 kids, who were taller than she had recalled and had hide around their brows to indicate that they were shinobi and now officially adults, suddenly thudded into her and embraced her. She first objected, "Hey, watch it," as the 3 embraced her as one, but she couldn't resist feeling warm inside, so she touched Moegi's and Konohamaru's heads. "Yar yar, you've gotten so big, all of you. We've missed you." Naruto.ne. Konohamaru let out a few happy tears that nearly filled his eyes. "It's been so boring without you." She pushed them away and knelt down until she was face-to face with each of them. "Don't worry, my little Kappa," she said, smiling at them. "I'll make sure you become the best shinobi in all of your class. Atbeo. Nisan is back, and she'll have lots of time to hang around with all of you. Atbeo." Moegi exclaimed, "Onisan," and threw her arms around her neck, embracing her. While Moegi revered the ground, Konohamaru walked on and looked up to her as her role model in life. Naruko may have viewed her as a younger brother and apprentice. "Okay, Eri. Tadaima," she said, smoothing her hair and looking up when she heard a laugh. "Sakura-chan." As Naruik stood up, Suad's apprentice bowed her head and said, "Welcome home, Naruko-chan." They exchanged glances, as friends and family who haven't seen one another in a long time frequently do. To any other observer, Haruno Sakura had undergone significant change since her younger years. It's been a while, hasn't it? Her body had become slender and soft, her cheeks sharp and gaunter, and she had grown taller. Her clothes had also changed, becoming more practical but also more revealing, and she now wore gloves over her hands to hide the hardened knuckles she had acquired from smashing trees and boulders with gnawed by savage strength and controlled rage. Nevertheless, she appeared exactly the same to Naruko's eyes as always. With her hands on her hips, Sakura said, "My, you've grown up, haven't you? Become all womanly and stuff. I'm a bit jealous. What about me, Naruko? Chan, do you think I've grown up?" After giving her a close look, Naruko felt the cozy embrace of friendship sink into her stomach. All that existed was friendship. She winced inwardly at that. What had happened to that? However, her feelings for Sakura had been so central to her identity that, damn it all, it was too confusing and caused her head to ache. "Nah, you look the same as ever, Sakura, Chan." Sakura's laughter turned to annoyance as her eyebrows twitched dangerously. She muttered, "You bitch," and Naruko laughed uneasily at rousing Konoha's cherry tree demon. Nah, Sakura. Chan." Naruko made a broad gesture in an attempt to appease her. "No need to get testy. I really like your hair. What shampoo do you use? It's a very pink. Tell me, is that your natural hair color?" Konohamaru yelled. Naruko.nay. As two more recognizable shinobi approached from the opposite direction and started to listen in on the small group. "You're rambling, and you haven't shown me any awesome jutsu yet." "Wait," said the kid, "you have studied under that pervert, haven't you? Your Oiroke no Jutsu must have grown very powerful, but it can never match up to mine." A puff of smoke suddenly rose up around Konohamaru, obscuring him as his hands flashed into a hand sign. Once it was gone, a curvy young woman with long brown hair and dark eyes stood nude and preening with a seductive pout. Mothers shielded their children's eyes, distracted bystanders slammed into lampposts and walls or dropped their jaws to stare, and Sakura started yelling and swearing. As she turned to face Naruko, she noticed that she was smiling slightly. "Perverted brat. Do you know what a silly?" She stopped. She said softly but firmly, "Konohamaru-kun, I don't do that technique anymore," as the naked woman vanished, to be replaced by a dejected Konohamaru. "And neither should you." Sakura was unable to contain her amazement at Naruko's maturity, growth, and beautiful appearance. That technique, she must have become extremely strong by now, possessing a variety of jutsu, and had most likely created a new, even more potent jutsu than the Rasengan. That technique is too weak. Behold, Oiroke no Jutsu 2.0 Twincesto Pawa. What? Sakura thought at last. The new jutsu appeared to her in a puff of smoke. An exact replica of Naruko appeared behind her, holding her by the waist and busy kissing the base of her neck while her hands searched a chest now half undone and unbuttoned in a schoolgirl's sailor uniform, her tan skin glistening with perspiration. "Nei-san." Naruko groaned slightly through pursed lips. "Don't," one Naruko muttered feebly to the other. Her protests became heated whispers as the groping clone licked her neck, leaving a trail of gleaming saliva behind. "Sisters shouldn't do things like this. It's so wrong," she gasped. "And yet, so right. Kiss me, Nei." The pinkette's eyebrows twitched as she clenched her fists and looked around as Sakura roared, "Naruko, Shanaru," and struck with all her might, dispelling the transformation in the clone and sending Naruko crashing into a distant wall. While Moegi appeared unsure of whether she loved Sakura or Naruko more, Sakura was most attracted to the newcomers. Konohamaru and Udon gazed in wonder at the location where Naruko had once lived. The man who had been accompanying her was snarled at by Shikamaru, Tamari until they paused to observe something you would definitely never see on the streets of Sanagakure. "Were you looking at that little slut?" Dazed and unsteady on his feet, the Nara turned to face his ostensibly girlfriend and asked, "What?" He felt something fall onto his shirt's breast, and when he looked down and felt with his fingers, he discovered that his heavily bleeding nose was betraying him. "What? No, never. You're," he said. "Troublesome," he sighed once. When he attempted to flee Tamari's fury and violent behavior, she yelled, "You ass!" and chased after him with a drawn fan. He ran so quickly that he kicked up a trail of dust into the air that oozed away behind him. "Ow!" Naruko wiped her coat and frowned as she stood up from the wall she had been punched against. "What'd you do that for?" "That was mean. Atbeo." Naruko winced as the irate cry, "You perverted brat," came next. "There I was thinking that you had grown up, and then suddenly you do something like that." "Konohamaru core," she said without pausing. "Scram. I need to drag my retarded teammate in front of the Hokage, so piss off." "Hio, Sakura. Sama." Moegi immediately yelled and started dragging her silent and noisy teammates away by the scruffs of their necks, while Sakura grabbed the blonde's arm and started to drag her in the direction of the Hokage's spire. Naruko loudly grumbled, "You've gotten so unwomanly, Sakura," while being half dragged to the tower next to the academy. "Look who's talking," was the prompt, abrasive reply. "You're the one that uses masculine pronouns and who's rude all the time. Quite unbefitting of a lady, you know. The way you talk, and the way you dress. Would it kill you to wear a dress or a skirt every now and then?" "Oh, don't be like that," the blonde pouted solemnly, slightly offended, tearing her arm free and strutting down to the Hokage tower with the pinkette, her hands on the back of her head as usual. "There's nothing wrong with my clothes, ya know. Black works on everyone, and orange is the new black. Atbeo. And if you don't like the way I talk, well, you can bloody well sod off." When they reached the tower's entrance and were ushered in without incident by guards who could identify the Hokage's apprentice anywhere, Sakura remarked, "It's not that much for me. But, wait, you don't have a boyfriend now, have you?" Naruko stammered back, blush creeping into her whiskered cheeks. What's that got to do with anything?" Sakura quickly responded, "Nothing, just curious, that's all," before an embarrassing thought crossed her mind. "Or maybe you got a girlfriend." As they ascended the tower, Naruko reluctantly explained. "No," shaking her head, she said, "I don't have a girlfriend. Not that there's anything wrong with stuff like that, but I haven't had the time for anything else but training for the last 3 fucking years. But why do you ask? Kinda weird talking about this. Atbeo. Like, first question you ask after I get back after 3 damn years away." But Sakura pressed, "But don't you see, if you keep acting like this then you'll never get a boyfriend, or a girlfriend, for that matter. Start talking properly, put some makeup and a skirt on to show off those legs, and you'll be beating the boys away with a stick." She quickly shot back, containing the, "unlike others I could mention," that she had been about to say. "I don't need a guy to be happy, and I don't base my life around whether or not I have a guy." Sakura and herself would have suffered if she had said that. The question that hurt the most was, "I'm not saying you should, Naruko. But 3 years, don't you get lonely?" With a smirk that appeared natural but wasn't, Naruko shrugged and said, "Nah, that makes me able to focus on training properly." She withheld the real response. "I've been lonely all my life, so I'm accustomed to it. And if, mind you, I do decide to get a boyfriend, or a partner or whatever, I want someone who likes me for who I am, not who I dress like. I'm not going to make myself look like Ino-chan just because I like a guy. Atbeo." Sakura nodded as they climbed the final stairs and entered the main hallway of the top floor, which housed the Hokage's office and the rookery. "That's always important, to be able to be yourself around your partner and never pretend anything," she said. "But guys are pretty dumb as a rule, you know. You basically got to beat them over with a sign saying, 'Take me,' to get them to know that you're interested in them. Dressing up for a date is the first thing you can do." As they followed the arching hallway to a corner, where the double doors of the Hokage's office were located, she said, "I still don't want to get tarted up, ya know. Not only do I suck at it, but it's just a waste of time." Sakura muttered, "Well, not all of us can get perfect tans without even tanning." They headed for that corner, and she gave a testy, "Oh, stove it, Haruno," response. "And you think I have it easy? Because of certain lumps of fat?" She pointed to a particular region of her body as a sign. "My back gets so bloody sore you could chuck a sword through my spine and I wouldn't even notice. And training, and fighting. You know how many sports bras I go through in a year? I'd kill to be small like you." That was all she had time to say before she lost sight of the fact that she was walking straight into something just around that far corner due to her distracted yammering. She bounced off it, losing her balance until she fell hard on her rear end and most likely bruised her tailbone. "Naruko. Daishobu." Sakura looked at her friend first, but as she turned to face the object Naruko had bounced off, her concerns and the majority of her lucid thoughts vanished. "Owie." The blonde tomboy whimpered while massaging the small of her back. She looked up and saw a pair of feet first. What was that? Did someone retarded piece of cartilage decide to put a fucking wall hidden by a corner? "Shit, that," she said. It was a pretty good pair of feet, not that she was attracted to feet or anything, large and calloused, with short, bare nails. The black sandals he wore were studded for better grip and reinforced for long walks, which clearly indicated that they belonged to a man. Garbed in a pair of black shinobi fatigue slacks with kunai holsters tied at both heavily muscled thighs, supported by a simple black belt of cloth, over which a long chain had been circled around a firm but narrow waist, those feet were attached to a pair of legs, clearly again, otherwise it would have been a little strange and possibly disgusting. Over it, a leather jacket in that weird cream colored hue, unzipped and revealing a fishnet mesh undershirt and a torn, oversized torso underneath. Even in the dimness of that corridor, the jacket's arms, which ended an inch from wrists that connected to bare, calloused, and heavy hands, revealed glints of gleaming steel vambraces. Naruko was blinded by the shine, and as she looked higher, she noticed the slightly curved hilt of a Yanmaodao sword protruding over a broad shoulder from a tasseled brass pommel shaped like a roaring lion. Whoever he was tall, but when she looked at his face, he appeared young. She recognized his sharp chin, even with its clean-shaven appearance. His eyes were squinted shut, and his pale face was the victim of a slowly spreading blush. His indigo black hair had been cut short and jagged, standing straight on his head in a manner reminiscent of the military. "Well," said Naruko, who had no idea who this man was. "Let me just say, she took him in again, and overall, he was very much to her liking." Exaggeratedly, she drawled, "Hello sailor." Which made them both flush more. "Aren't Cha gonna help a girl up?" Whatever he said seemed to get stuck in his throat, so he stopped, took a deep breath to prevent hyperventilating, and then his eyes flashed open to stare at her. "Sorry," the man stammered helplessly. Despite his deep and melodic voice, Naruko Chan sounded small to her, as though he were only whispering. She instantly recognized him when she saw his nearly white, pupilless, pale lavender eyes. "Hinata!" she exclaimed, panting. She recalled a pale little boy who was shorter than she was, but who also had a deep-seated social anxiety, a constant flush, and a shyness that was almost crippling. However, there was only one thing she could say about his transformation after all these years. She exclaimed, "Hot damn, lad," with excitement. Meeting her like this wasn't how he had envisioned it after all those years of dreaming about her, wishing for her, seeing her before his eyes every night, and craving the warmth of her smile and the feel of her skin. She was not what he had thought she would be. She was even more magnificent than the adult version of her had appeared in his imagination. And when he saw her again, he was acting even more foolishly than he had always feared. "Hot damn, lad," she exclaimed, breaking the tense silence with a grin he could only characterize as vixen as she gazed up at him from the floor, her feet planted so that her legs were bent out in front of her and her hands supporting her weight behind her, arching her back and making her. He chanted to himself, "I must not faint, must not faint, must not faint." Her smile was brighter than the sun, and she asked with excitement, "What the bloody hell have they been feeding ya? You're as big as a conservative party prostitution bill at a knocking shop." For some reason, Haruno Sakura was staring at him in his open jacket, but he had no eyes for her. "What are you on about?" he asked sharply in a whisper from a distance. He could have made a fist to indicate how many fucks he was giving Haruno at the time. He only had eyes for her. With another smile, Naruko declared, "I have no idea." Her cheeks were flushed, and her mouth gradually turned into a shy pout. She extended her hand to him and said, "Are you?" But before she could even finish her request, he pulled her up. He fumbled out, "S's. Sorry, and Naruko.cha. Chan," and the sane and sound part of his mind gave him a slap on the back of the head. The majority of his mind, however, was unconcerned because he was holding her hand in his. It was a small, soft hand with tan, silky skin, and the calluses on her finger pads and knuckles gave it a more delicate appearance. He repeated, "Sorry," and released her hand before she could see how sweaty he was. "I didn't mean to trip you, Naruko. Chan, I promise." She used her right hand, the one he hadn't grasped, to pull her up, to rub the back of her head and say, "Well, I've already forgiven you, so you can stop apologizing." The girl in question objected silently, saying, "I can tell that Sakura Chan's gotten stronger by the sound trashing she gave me earlier, but I see you've gotten pretty powerful yourself, huh?" Thank you, and Naruko Chan, was all he could manage to do. How was your training? I'm sure you've gotten a lot stronger too." Observing the significant height difference between them, she smiled up at him and asked, "You still stutter like that, don't ya?" She couldn't help but laugh when he blushed even more and turned his head to look at the wall. "Despite the whole hunky gay porn star thing you got going on?" she asked. He was so adorable. She reached out and gave him a cheek pat, saying, "Don't worry, stud muffin, I think it's adorable." "What?" Before he had a chance to notice that she had changed the subject and moved aside to stand next to her old friend, she asked, "Are you here to see the old hag too?" He answered, avoiding the temptation to lick his extremely dry lips, "Yes, I'm here to see Hokage Sama." "Are you here for your debriefing and assignment?" As she said, "Yeah, and Sakura Chan wants me to stop teaching inappropriate techniques to the children," she used quotation marks to convey her mocking tone. "She's probably going to ask the old hag to give me a spanking or something." It was nearly overwhelming to imagine Naruko hunched over the busty Hokage's lap, stripped naked, her face contorted into a mask of excruciatingly sharp pleasure as the slug saint punished her by repeatedly slapping her across her flawless posterior with the flat of her hand. He was brought back to reality to find Sakura and Naruko staring at him strangely as he chanted his Kuruko motto in his head. Must not faint, must not faint, must not faint, etc. You alright, Hinata-kun? Sakura had asked him, her voice low and submissive, her cheeks flushed. Why were girls speaking to him in such a manner these days? A short time after he began training with Lee, they had begun doing it. Were they unable to look him in the eye without seeing a monster because they had somehow heard about the time he nearly killed his cousin? Neji had to be questioned about it. He smiled and said, It's fine, Sakura. Chan, letting her know that he wasn't the savage she undoubtedly believed him to be. However, she just turned away and blushed more. This was something he really needed to ask Neji. I was summoned by Hokage. Sama. But Jiraiya. Sama is already inside. TCH. Snorted Naruko. Sakura. Chan, stud. Muffin.kun. I'll show you how to deal with Obashins, she said, passing Hinata and heading toward the closed doors of the Hokage's office. Have you guys been sucking up to the old hag while I was away? She'll just get a big head from that, ya know. She's just keeping the seat warm for me. Adbeo. She then positioned herself, pulled her leg back, and kicked the double doors open with a loud bang. Sakura let out a startled sound, and Hinata couldn't help but squeak in fear before giving himself a mental slap for seeming weak in front of Naruko. Chan. However, when the blonde young Kunoichi barged in and adopted a nearly theatrical posture, their fear only intensified. What's up, motherfuckers? She exclaimed, grinning triumphantly. She quickly winked and made the peace sign, preventing the charging Enbu from attacking her as they gave their leader frustrated glances. Rukodem Hokage in Da House. Adbeo, she exclaimed. Senju Tsunade, the fifth Hokage and leader of Konoha by the grace of the spirits of fire, leapt from her seat and glared at the girl with daggers. What the hell, Gaki? She exclaimed. I just had those doors put in. Red oak from Do no Kuni. This is coming out of your salary, you mark my words, young lady. What talking about, Tsunade? Obachan, yelled Naruko in response, furious at the idea of having her ramen money taken away. It's my damn office, so I can do what the hell I like with it, and as soon as you get your decrepit old ass off my chair I'll install some revolving doors. They argued, not in my lifetime you will. As Sakura and Hinata cautiously made their way into the office to stand next to the irritated Jiraiya and the wide-eyed Shizune, avoiding the fury of their commander and mistress. Haruno, Hyuga, Jiraiya said, ignoring the women who were arguing, each of whom was telling the other that their attire was only appropriate for slatterns and even tempered women. How's digs? He was able to hear Sakura say, okay, I guess. Hinata bowed and said, quite fine, thank you, Jiraiya, Sama. Bah. Jiraiya put a hand on the young man's shoulder and grinned at him. He politely shifted his head out of the way to avoid a thrown sake cup that smashed out the window behind him and struck a stray dove. Stop with that Sama, nonsense. Think of me like an uncle. Like a drunken old uncle that comes into town every odd year, eating all your pies and shagging all your birds. Jiraiya. Sama? Sakura asked him, pretending not to notice the crash behind her as Tsunade locked the blonde girl's head and pounded on the top of her head. Are you alright? You show signs of fatigue, premature aging and lack of judgment. He objected, what do you mean, lack of judgment? From a distance, Shizune noted, you called women, birds, in the same room as Tsunade, Sama. As Tsunade threatened to expel the owners of Ichiraku Ramen from Konoha, Sakura continued, indeed, as though she had never been interrupted. Naruko, with horrified tears streaming down her cheeks, pleaded with her not to. All signs of chakra exhaustion. You should go to the hospital, get yourself checked up. The perverted sage smiled at her and turned to face the two arguing women, saying, whatever you say, Minnie. Tsunade. Naruko cried, you're crushing me. As Tsunade gave the girl a bear hug while squeezing her ample bosoms. Sakura lectured him, Jiraiya. Sama, you've been keeping up with the Energizer Vixen for 3 years. No one alive can do that and not suffer adverse effects. You should get yourself checked out as soon as we're done. What do you mean my apartment got appropriated? They exclaimed as they looked up to see Naruko looking clearly angry. Tsunade sat down behind her desk once more and said, that's what happens when you forget to pay the rent for 3 years, Gaki. Naruko complained, couldn't you stall the tick man or something? That was my flat, ya know? I've lived there since I was 5 years old. With a firm tone and a hint of authority, the Hokage said, You don't pay your rent or make any arrangements to that effect and you suffer the consequences. Jiraiya looked to her warmly and remarked that she had developed into a great leader. She spoke as though she had been born into that role, and it was as if her grandfather's mantle had fallen over her and seeped into her. Naruto begged for an answer, but where am I going to stay? Suad's face took on a sympathetic, understanding expression. I don't have enough money for a hotel, and I won't stay with Ero, Senin. Tsunade told the nearly crying blonde, you can stay with me at the manor, baby girl. The blonde grew excited at the news but then scowled. The Hokage's eyebrows started to twitch dangerously as she complained, but you're going to cramp my style, Obachan. If you don't want to stay on the damn streets you'd best take a better tone with me, Gaki. Naruko rolled her eyes at her, Kasen, and said, okay, geez. Tsunade was taken aback by the abrupt shift in the girl's manner of speaking, asking, Ka-san, why? The lively young Kunoichi said, if I'm going to stay with you it's better that I think of you as my mother than my granny, right? As if it were the most natural thing in the world. Tsunade just gave a small smile and scoffed as though amused, but only to Jiraiya's trained eyes. In contrast, he could sense that she was melding inside. Otherwise it'd be a little weird, ya know? Good. The sulky old lady, who appeared much younger than she was, nodded as though content. Her smile vanished as she motioned for everyone present, with the exception of her Anbu bodyguards, to stand in front of her desk. Most of your possessions are at a storage facility right now. Shizune will see to it that they are moved over to your new home, hey, after this meeting. But first, business. How have your training gone, Naruko? Have you gotten stronger? With confidence, the girl smiled. Yeah, I have. You can bet your hat on it, Adbeo. Her tone remained as severe as ever before she turned to Hinata. Good. But your new skills will need to be evaluated so that we know where we have the best use for them. Hyuga.san. His response was curt, Osu, Hokage. Sama, as befitted a good little soldier. He nodded once more, and she waved him away. I need your team for a special matter, which I will discuss with you after I've dealt with Naruko and Sakura, nay, she said. She waved him off cheerfully, smiling behind him as he left the room. Nice to see you again, Hinata.kun, she said, and he gave her a shy blush and the smallest of smiles at the door before shutting the doors from the outside. Turning to Sakura, she said, okay, spill. When the hell did he grow those abs? Huh, was the incredibly well spoken query, reflecting on the sigh of his mesh-clad torso under his unzipped leather jacket. Naruto asked incredulously, seriously, did you not see that washboard thing he got going on? Her words vanished into a surreal fog until Tsunade clapped her hands once to get her attention. I mean, there was, like, more than 6 of them, at least. Adbeo. Maybe 8 or 10. And those pecs, she said. Oi. I know you got the attention span of a mayfly, but allow me to interrupt your fantasizing about hunky boys. Shotokan. Cried Naruko in alarm. He's like a 10th of your age. You little. She made herself remain motionless and ignored Jiraiya's chuckle until she could carry him out back and disembowel him so that he wouldn't be seen by anyone. She slid her gaze over to Sakura, who nodded and grinned in eager obedience. As I was about to say, before you so rudely interrupted me, I will need you to be evaluated to determine your current strengths. Both of you two will, she said, and I have just the person in mind to test your skills. In order to avoid overhearing anything said in the Hokage's office, Hinata sat outside its battered doors at a respectable distance. After all, the Hokage's private affairs were her own, and she frequently had concerns about things that only she was supposed to be aware of. He reflected on his character and identity while he sat. Pervert Hyuga Hinata was. Of course, not everyone was aware of that. He had kept it a secret since he first saw her when he was 7 years old, and most people assumed that he was utterly enamored with her because he blushed and stammered whenever he saw her. However, that was only a portion of the reality. Yes, it was because he loved her. His cheeks flushed red at the mention of her name, that blessed name that seemed to have been etched on the inside of his heart by fate itself on the day of his birth, and he would undoubtedly become intoxicated by her if he were in her presence. Every time he lay down on his bed and fell asleep, he saw her face in front of his eyes, and her name was the most common word in his diary, frequently ringed in by tiny hearts and flowers. Indeed, he cherished Uzumaki Naruko. For the longest time, his entire personality had been shaped by this all-consuming, obsessive love. He had silently admired her great fighting skills, admired her bold and unrelenting nature, and watched her from a distance. Both of them had been kids at the time, and since he was only 12, his love had been quiet and chaste. After she left, though, he made an effort to move on, even though it felt like a hole had been left in his life. In fact, he had gone on 3 dates. All of this was done at the insistence of his older cousin Neji. He insisted that monogamy was just not a word that should be in Hinata's vocabulary and that the heir to the Hyuga clan had a duty to produce more members to the clan and ensure its future. It had even been encouraged by his father. After all, aside from his 2 biological children with Hinata's mother, his father had multiple children with numerous clan mistresses, and his mother never seemed to mind. He should get used to it since it was a part of the Hyuga way of life. 10. A teammate of his cousin, was one of these girls and had described Hinata as cute. The last had been a pale-haired girl from the village's civilian section named Mina. The first had been a girl from the clan named Narimi, who took great pride in her Hyuga appearance of long hair and pale, nearly white, eyes. Even as they conversed over their meals at a yakiniku restaurant, he felt uncomfortable and disgusted, even though she was the person he had found most attractive. Ultimately, he thanked each girl politely and left for home without even glaring at them or kissing them on the cheek, that one girl still burning brightly in his mind. He found out that he was a pervert following one of these incidents. His manhood had grown to erection at the mere thought of her rear, throbbing painfully. He had been lying in his bed, thinking about her smile, her long blonde hair, the luster of her whiskered cheeks, and the sway of her hips as she walked. In order to enjoy the memory of her, he had pictured her doing a variety of erotic things with him, such as kissing him, holding him, pushing her breasts against him, guiding his thickness inside of him, and forcing her tongue down her throat as she stroked his length. He ejaculated as a result, and he felt ill after cleaning himself with a paper towel. It had been nearly a year since he last saw her, and he was 13 at the time, so she must have been 14. Even as his manhood returned, he felt sick when he recalled the pictures he had created in his mind of doing such heinous things with the love of his life. It continued like that for months. After training during the day, he would enjoy himself in the comfort of his own room and then despise himself for going on dates he didn't particularly want to go to in the evenings. He felt sicker afterward and his fantasies grew more obscene the more he did it. Even during his training sessions and missions with the rest of his team, his self-loathing started to seep into his conscience. To the dismay of his father and his cousin, as well as the concern of his teacher Kurenai Sensei, it diverted him, and his performance appeared to falter. She nearly chose not to send him and the rest of his team to the Sanagakure Chunin exams. Nearly. He eventually passed the tests, but only because of the help of his teammates, who had saved him during a sandstorm and moved them out of the enemy's attack range using the Aburame bugs and the Inuzuka sense of smell. Hinata had only been able to mirror his opponent's attacks. Ultimately, they needed to be saved, by the village proctors they aimed to impress. Everyone was too preoccupied with their own thoughts and conversations to give any attention to the lone boy who followed in the back of the procession after the exams, so nobody mentioned his weakness or his poor performance on the way back to Konoha. However, he could sense their disdain as he walked, his pale eyes fixed on the ground. Their disgust was palpable to him. He was frail. He had always been weak, and just by virtue of being the only son of the current clan head, he had maintained his position as heir. Even his cousin had been too good for him. Even though Neji was a well-known genius and the head of the Hyuga branch family, he was still a member of the branch family. Hinata was a poor heir who was unable to defend herself, and he was a servant and guard who was supposed to protect the clan's heirs. If she put in enough effort, even his younger sister could defeat him in practice. He was weak and would remain weak forever. His attention shifted inward as he became engrossed in his own thoughts after his family wanted to celebrate his promotion once they got home to Konoha and he had participated in the celebrations in a token way. He had left early and returned to his room, his footsteps resonating through the main house's halls, which were now deserted except for him. He was by himself, weak and alone all the time. His thoughts turned to the blonde girl he had not seen in a long time, the one he lusted after and loved with all his heart. After he had undressed and laid down on his bed to rest, he started to relieve himself in the typical manner of teenage boys when he thought of her, her flawless lips, and her vivid blue eyes. But this time, he had a different idea. Her lovely, fair face twisted into a sneer instead of smiling, preening, and embracing him. In his dream, she spat at him and asked, "You think you are worthy of me? You'll never be. You're weak, pathetic?" And the young man sobbed himself to sleep rather than continuing to masturbate. He ran after her in his dreams, always at her side, heading for a girl he would never catch up to and who would never return his love. He ghosted through life like a phantom the following day, wandering aimlessly through the Hyuga compound's halls. For days, his vacant gaze pierced the hearts of those who loved him, but when they attempted to lift him out of his gloom, all he saw was his own self. Loathing mirrored in their concern. He turned down every invitation Shino and Kiba made to go out or go on missions. He ignored his father's thoughtful questions about his health and well-being, and he turned down his younger sister's demands to play or go into town. Neji was ultimately responsible for returning him to the world of the living. One morning while Hinata was busy thinking, the partition between his rooms slid open with such force that it struck the distant wall. When he looked up, he saw his cousin standing there, dressed for a mission, his chest snarling in an uncharacteristically ferocious manner, his teeth bared in a snarl. He yelled, "The dojo!" and Byakugan's eyes came to life. Now. It was an order, not a request. The majority of the clan, along with Hinata's teammates and sensei, watched as he was nearly pulled into the dojo for a sparring match with the genius. Weakly, he said, "Neji-kun, stop it," and the young genius stood across from him on the dojo mat. Even his mother and two of his father's mistresses were present. "I don't feel like." The words, "I couldn't give two shits what you feel just now, cousin," nearly made Neji growl. Neji raised his hands in his trademark guard and said, "Whether you want to or not, we will spar now. This is about the clan. This is about our legacy." Hinata started to say, "Neji, just shut up," but his cousin was already running toward him, eyes open, chakra blazing all around him. He did everything he could to avoid the Hyuga prodigy's divination and get out of its range. He screamed, "Stop it!" but Neji jumped after him, reaching for his shoulder with his palm outstretched. Hinata was aware of that blow. He might become crippled if he were struck because the blow would strike his key bone and split his shoulder in two. He needed to leave. Or he had to defend himself. Thus, after days of improper eating, he blocked and gave his cousin the favor by making his weak body fight. Neji easily deflected his counter in his liberated state. He yelled and swung his blade faster and faster, putting Hinata on the defensive. "Is this your best?" he asked. "Is this all you got?" He begged, "Neji-kun, stop it," with a voice that was now trembling from weakness and a throat that was ragged from taking deep breaths. But the Hyuga's genius was unforgiving. He delivered 3 more blows before one of them managed to get past Hinata's defenses and land on his lower thigh, causing a sharp pain to pierce his leg before it was completely numb. "Ah. As I thought," Neji said, rising to his feet as Hinata collapsed to the ground, gripping his leg. "You haven't changed a bit since our last fight during the first Chunin exams. You're still as useless in a fight." He screamed, "Stop it, Neji-kun," and attempted to stand up, but a blow to his back caused excruciating pain that sent him back to his knees. As the clan watched in silence, Neji growled, crying like a little girl, and weeping like a scared civilian. "To think that you would be the future of this clan?" He laughed cruelly. "You're pathetic." "Shut up." Hinata squinted as his cousin inadvertently repeated the Naruto's words that he had seen so frequently in his dreams. "Just stop it." When Neji finally snorted, the word, "weak," seemed to reverberate throughout Hinata's body. Feeble. Was he only that? Feeble. Not worthy of the clan, not worthy of her. Feeble. However, unlike before, the word did not make him feel ashamed or indifferent. Anger burning in his gut, Neji watched with secret satisfaction as Hinata's pale eyes flashed open, all of their bloodline's power blazing in them. He had been assigned by Hiyashi to rouse his cousin from his torpor, and since all soft approaches had failed, he had decided that it would be best to do so with force. Hinata stood slowly, favoring his injured leg and limping a little, as if his mission had been accomplished. Neji pondered, "You want to fight back, finally?" But he hardly had time to complete his provocation before Hinata transformed irrevocably and struck like thunder, his self. Loathing and anger finally rupturing the barrier that had held him back, and the beast began to roar inside of him. Without saying a word, Hinata roared and charged, using the same blow Neji had once delivered to the unawares caught genius to strike him in the stomach, causing a shower of blood to burst from the older boy's lips. Hinata's mother, Hizumi, clasped her hands in front of her mouth in sudden fear as the clan gasped together. Hiyashi commanded, "Hinata, cease," but the clan's heir was not receptive to his father's cries. Now it appeared that the roles were reversed, with Hinata striking genuinely and brutally while Neji was fighting to stay upright. With the sickening snap of a rotten twig, the genius's arm was broken by a blow. Hinata threw himself on top of his cousin, snarling like a beast, driven beyond words and reason as he repeatedly struck Neji over the face with closed fists blazing with chakra. Another hit to his leg, half blocked, further weakened his until he fell onto his back. The clan watched in utter horror as their champion was finally pulled off with considerable force. Hiyashi yelled, "Take him to the hospital." At 2 members of the branch family, he turned to face his eldest child and only son, who were both in the iron grips of 3 guards. "If the Hokage doesn't treat his injuries soon he'll die," he said. "What is the meaning of this?" Explain yourself. I'm not weak, Hinata uttered, his eyes blazing with long, suppressed emotion. I won't be weak anymore. I'm going to make myself worthy. Hiyashi responded, no one worthy of being clan leader beats their family within an inch of his life. Hinata appeared to regain his temper and gazed wide-eyed at the sizable pool of blood that had been spilled over the dojo's mats. Only a few clan members were left in the room after Neji was removed, including his sobbing mother and a pale Hanabi who was looking at her brother in fear. Such savagery. Barbarism, that's what it is. Hinata firmly stated, he had it coming, as he ripped himself free from the guard's hold and strode out of the compound, going everywhere and nowhere. He finally made his way to a training ground with a sizable forest, where he let his frustration and repressed anger out on the trees until the majority of them were reduced to kindling and his knuckles and palms were cracked and bleeding. He gasped and fell to the ground, staring at his fingers in disgust as tears started to fall down his cheeks. Did he mean it? Had he intended to do Neji so much harm? Did he intend to kill him? He then proceeded to Konoha Hospital to find out how his cousin was doing. After learning that Neji was awake and not in any serious condition, he sneaked into his cousin's room in the dark to sit next to him when he woke up. Hinata had sat in a chair by the sickbed and looked at all the bandages covering the older boy, saying, I'm so sorry, Neji. Nissan. I don't know what came over me. With a feeble smile, Neji took his hand and said, it's quite alright, Hinata. Sama. I goaded you to try and bring you out of your depression. I must admit it worked a little too well. Hey, Hinata said with a half-sob, half-chuckle. Neji frowned and asked softly, why are you sad, Hinata? Sama. Despite the bandages tied around his head and the medication that kept him awake and content so he wouldn't fall asleep from his repeated concussions. You've been growing distant over the last year. Is something the matter? He gave himself a stern headshake. It's nothing. There is something. Ever since the Chunin exam, and before even that, you've been sad almost all the time, almost never smiling. Neji continued in a somber tone. When the younger boy remained quiet and reserved, he pleaded, tell me. You can tell me everything, Hinata. Sama. Do you? Hinata asked, licking his lips. Do you remember Uzumaki Naruko? Chan? Neji looked at him disbelievingly. As grave as ever, Neji raised an eyebrow and asked, remember the only person who has ever beaten me until today? Of course I do, Hinata. Sama. What about her? Hinata struggled to say, because he only did so when he was with his one true love. His tongue felt 3 times larger than it actually was. When he finally blurted out, think I'm in love with her. Neji's response was flat. He said, no shit. With the same flatness. Have you been promoted to commander of the obvious squad? Should I start calling you obvious, Taicho? You knew? Hinata inquired, his eyes wide and his cheeks burning. Neji stated plainly, everyone knows except for Naruko-san. That girl is thicker than sake paste sometimes. And I can't for the life of me understand what you see in her. But, Neji continued with a measured acknowledgement, the heart wants what it wants. Why has your love for her made you sad? Since the barrier containing his emotions had been breached, Hinata uttered the words in a whisper, because I'm not worthy of her. I'm weak, like you said. And she's so strong. She even beat you without having to surprise you or resort to dirty tricks. She's beautiful, you know. And I'm just a plain guy that doesn't have half of her skill or talent or ability. I will never be worthy of her. Bollocks, was Neji's firm response. He put his hand on his cousin's and said, she's the one who won't be worthy of you. You're strong, Hinata, and believe me when I say that your potential with the Juken and the Byakugan is the greatest I have ever seen. Even greater than mine. Hinata looked up into his cousin's eyes in astonished amazement. All you need to catch up to her and prove yourself worthy is the will to do it. He became serious as he said, but Neji wasn't finished. Neji was certain that discipline and strength of will and character. These things can be learned. When you have that, the rest will follow. The idea made Hinata's head swim. But if I haven't gotten any stronger yet, doing the things I've always done, how do I grow stronger? Asked the man. Only you know the answer to that. If one road to enlightenment is closed to you, know that there are many others that are open. Taking care of his cousin's tender feelings, Neji smiled feebly once more. Try a new method, a new path to walk, or a new teacher. You're my little brother, Hinata, and I know that with enough hard work you can do anything. I'll never give up. They repeated what Naruko had said so long ago, and never go back on my word. Such is my shinobi vow. For the first time in a long time, Hinata felt his tears dry up and a smile return to his face. You really think I can become strong? I know that you can grow strong enough to surpass us all, Hinata.kun, Neji responded. And he was resolved to prove his cousin correct in the days that followed. Any work he could do to hone his Juken techniques would have to wait until the genius recovered again because Neji would take a few months. He would need to practice other things until then, but what? He considered what Naruko would find impressive. His love for her remains one of his defining characteristics, and chose not to pursue genjutsu because she would undoubtedly view a specialization in such a field as weak and faddish. Furthermore, Hinata lacked the skill for more complex ninjutsu because, in comparison to many of his age group, he had a relatively small chakra reservoir, which he had to train before he could focus on learning the sorceress shinobi art. He was therefore left with very few choices, and he didn't find fuinjutsu to be particularly appealing. Taijutsu and other close quarters fighting techniques were his only remaining options. He also happened to know who was Konoha's leading authority on hand combat. Lee exclaimed, "Yosh," as he leapt up on the table in the Hyuga family's dining room, shocking a number of servants and clan members and frightening away the pigeons that were perched on the roof tiles far above them. "It shall be my honor to teach you everything I know, Hinata.san. The fire of youth shall spread to engulf all the world." With a weary expression, Hinata started to object. "I just want to know if you have any exercises for strength." But flinched and leapt away as he reached down and took something out of his leg warmers. Then he saw the weights Lee always wore, and the thought came to him, weights? In an operatic style, he declared, "Wear them whenever you exercise and your youthful fire shall blaze grand under the weights and transform your simple carbon muscles into diamond. And I shall teach you the basics of the Goken style to grind and polish that diamond into a brilliant shine." "Sure." Hinata groaned in surprise as his arms slammed into the floor under the weights, and he smiled at the obviously insane young man, taking the weights from him. "Isn't this a little much, Lee.san?" he suggested in a strangled tone. He firmly lectured, "Nonsense. The greatest adversity leads to the greatest of triumphs. The greatest of villains demands the greatest of heroes." Before leaping off the table and securing the weights around his ankles by pulling the legs of Hinata's pants up. "I shall bring you others soon, for your arms and legs both. But for now we shall go to your dojo, and I shall teach you the Goken way." Hinata was already starting to feel guilty about that specific endeavor. When Lee took him hiking in the mountains, he started to regret it, especially because he was only able to walk on his palms. At that moment, he was certain that Lee and his sensei Guy were both insane. After 3 months of intense training, however, he was certain that it had paid off, and when he and Neji sparred after his cousin had recovered, their bout ended in a draw because Hinata's newfound strength, speed, and versatility were equal to Neji's technique. They studied and sparred for many long hours every evening when Hinata had no missions, after Neji decided it was time to advance the Juken arts into uncharted territory. Hinata turned to another discipline she had neglected for too long because Neji had other things to do in the mornings, usually with his team or as a taijutsu instructor at the academy. "I don't know," muttered Sharingan Kakashi, the leading ninjutsu expert in Konoha following the death of Sarutobi Hiruzen, as he scratched his head in a bored manner. "You already have the Byakugan, don't ya? Why would you need ninjutsu too?" Hinata bowed low and stated firmly, "I need a way to fight them even if I can't touch them. Please teach me, Hitaki sensei." He objected, saying, "But the more advanced techniques of the Juken are capable of ranged attacks," but he gave up when he saw Hinata's determined expression. "Alright, I can coach you in basic ninjutsu theory and practice. If nothing else, it might give you some diversified skills. What is your nature release affinity?" "Kaden. Fire," was Hinata's straightforward statement, and a single eye was covered by bushy brows. "Sure, Kaden. I thought it would be something rare in this country, what with the Hyuga blood and all. Maybe Sweden. Yeah, you seem like a Sweden guy to me. Or Fudon maybe. But almost every shinobi in this nation has the fire release affinity. Are you going to teach me or are you going to complain, Kakashi sensei?" Hinata was puzzled. He complained, "You haven't been talking to Sakura or Naruko lately, have you?" And got up, dusting off his slacks and putting his eroge book in his pocket. "I usually do both, ya know." He had assumed that the copy Shinobi's training program couldn't be any worse than Lee's, but it was, if only because Kakashi's teaching style differed greatly from the one Guy had taught his pupil. Kakashi preferred to shout directions and encouragement from the sidelines while Hinata gave the exercises his all. He had a laid-back attitude toward life and teaching. Additionally, Kakashi stated that he had a prototype regimen in mind for another individual, whom he did not name, which entailed Hinata calling forth as many shadow clones as possible to accelerate his learning process by assimilating the knowledge clones acquired when he dispelled them, or something similar. He was more focused on learning all the hidden arts that he had previously disregarded than he was on that. The boy pushed himself harder than he had ever seen anyone push themselves before, and Kakashi watched, seemingly unconcerned. Maybe Naruto or Sasuke could have matched him, but Hinata didn't have the vast chakra reserves of either of them or their innate ninjutsu skills. Up until the boy nearly committed suicide, he was proud of the boy's efforts. Hinata hardly recalled the incident. Days later, he woke up in a hospital room with an IV attached to his arm and a silent Neji sitting anxiously next to him. An instant earlier, he had been standing with his hands pressed to a tree stump, intent on using only his chakra and nature manipulation to make it catch fire and burn to embers. According to them, he would eventually experience living death and degeneration of his chakra coils if he continued in that manner, effectively poisoning his blood with radiation. Before returning to training, he was instructed to take a few months off to rest and recover in order to regain his strength. After 2 weeks, he was naturally on his feet and attempted to continue, but after 5 minutes he passed out from exhaustion. His father then pulled him aside and sternly forbidden him from ever practicing anything other than Juken techniques again. "You are a Hyuga, my son. You need nothing but your hands and your eyes." He was a Hyuga, indeed. He asked himself, why? As he sat in his room in the compound that night, the room that had become his prison in so many ways. What made him a Hyuga? For what reason was he Hyuga? He was aware that the clan techniques were safer and better suited to his own chakra and constitution, and that continuing to train as he was would increase his chances of running himself into the ground. But how could he ever be deserving of her if he didn't work as hard as Naruto? If he wasn't on par with her, why would she ever look at him? She was putting herself in a lot of danger by defending everyone, even when they mocked and disregarded her and swore at her back. Perhaps she needed someone to watch over her, to take care of her, to support her. And if he was weaker than her, how could he accomplish that? As Hyuga Hinata, he was unable to traverse the perilous path leading to the power he so desperately desired. He could only endure his strongest if he followed that path free from family and worldly distractions, just like the Yondaime for whom he had been named, he decided as a result. After emerging from his meditative state, he stood with his pale eyes fixed on determination and his hands in fists at his hips. There would be no turning back if he did this. Even though Sasuke is less treacherous, he would still like him. He refused to leave his community, just his family. He then packed his belongings and all of the money he had saved up over the years into a bag, threw away his white and lavender hooded jacket, put a black jacket over his shoulders, and turned to face himself in the full-length mirror. Although his clothes no longer wore the clan colors, his hair, face, and eyes were all Hyuga. His body was no longer Hyuga because of the training he had received from Lee, which had made him strong and bulky where many of the clan were willowy and lithe. His lips curved into a faint smile as he thought of one of the Junin sensei he knew who had chosen the same path as him. The long dark indigo hair that fell halfway down his back was grabbed by him with a kunai in one hand, and it was sheared off, leaving only sharp black spikes on his head that stood straight up in a manner evocative of Sarutobi Osamu's. His face appeared thinner, more angular, and more ravenous after the hair was removed. And the only remnant of his bloodline heritage were the Hyuga eyes. With the intention of never coming back, he left the clan compound that night. He returned there frequently, of course. He was not forced to join the branch family, had his Hyuga status revoked, or was disowned by his father. Under the alias Hyuga Hinata, he could still play with his younger sister, who was growing up fast, converse with all of his family members, ask his father for guidance, spar with his cousin, and easily indulge his teammates when they came around for missions or other events. In the eyes of the world, he was still the same boy who lived somewhere other than the compound where he had been raised. He decided to live alone and found a modest studio apartment in the heart of Konoha. He needed to have some understanding of his beloved's experiences if he wished to be worthy of her. Living alone for the first few weeks or months was more difficult than he ever imagined. He felt blind and lost in the woods, with no way home, without the sounds of the house, his family, and clan moving around him, greeting him, and assisting him with the daily tasks. Living on his own, cooking for himself, cleaning for himself, and paying his own bills was a burdensome task, but as the months passed, it became oddly liberating. He didn't need them to keep him upright. He lived alone. He was now able to stand alone. He had lost his weakness. In that apartment, he celebrated his 15th birthday with his close friends and family. He gently but firmly pushed her away after 10. 10 became a little inappropriate and tried to mac on him, saying something about how she loved him and always thought he was cute. He yearned to see that blonde angel, but there was only one for him. Now, no one else would just do it. The others appeared to comprehend and gave him the birthday presents he would have desired. Shikamaru and Asuma gave him a curved sword with a heavy foreign design that was different from the katanas of the shinobi nations, a chakra blade that fit the Juken fighting style he had developed, and Kiba gave him a white leather jacket that was strikingly similar to his own. In the end, Sakura and the others gave him a single long length of chain with a weight at each end, along with tools, kunai, clothing, medications, and supplies for upcoming missions. The words, "Let these links be as your determination," were spoken by his proud father. "Unbreakable. And promise me that you will never give up." "I'll never give up, father," was Hinata's adamant reply. "I'll never go back on my word. Such is my shinobi way. Watch me, Naruto, for you, I've become stronger." A shrill, harsh cry from the Senju princess herself, coming from inside the Hokage's office, brought him back to the present. "What you mean, Kekkei Genkei?" Naruto shouted back eagerly, "I'll show you." Hinata could see that some immense power was building even without his Byakugan eyes active. She yelled, "Bakuten," and "Shakaho." Then the world blew up. So, was the question that one blonde asked another as they emerged from the debris that had once been the Hokage's office's top floor. Tsunade glaring at her adopted daughter with daggers. "Kekkei Genkei, huh?" "Yep." She replied with a slightly sheepish smile as she stood up as well, wiping dust from her clothing and noticing, much to her annoyance, that a big piece of debris was stuck in her hair. "It's not really under control yet, per se, but it's getting there, Atbeo." As the dust settled from flowing through the air and causing Shizune and Sakura to cough in prolonged fits, Tsunade complained, "I really hope so," as she waved to clear the air in front of her face. The office's far wall had been completely destroyed, with big pieces of dry wall scattered all over the place and a thin coating of settling gray dust. She looked at the smashed hallway and swore, "Oh, Scunthorpe. Hinata's under there." With Shizune's assistance, Sakura stood in a daze, wondering, did Naruto murder Hunky-kun? Kakashi Sensei was picking himself up off the ground, and Jiraiya was standing idly leaning against the side of the Hokage's desk, shaking his head as though he had been expecting this whole thing. As Anbu appeared to appear out of nowhere, hurrying to attend to their mistress during these alleged hours of need, Tsunade complained, "Oh, I'm going to have one hell of a stimulating fucking conversation with Hiyashi. Temai about this." She stomped over to the debris piles. Before a whole wall and the majority of the Hokage Tower's top floor appeared to have been blasted out of existence, anyone in the vicinity of the explosion had only seen a flash of a brilliant crimson light. Fortunately for everyone, Hinata was the only one injured. As Tsunade retrieved the prone body of the Hyuga former heir from the dusty wreckage and slung him over her shoulder like a spud bag, Naruto asked, "Is he alright?" She then marched over to her desk and thumped him down on it without much fanfare. "He's not D." Tsunade, Shizune, and an intrigued Jiraiya leaned over the black-haired soldier and rolled her eyes at Naruto, saying, "Of course he's not dead." "See?" she said, lifting his eyelid with her thumb and pointing to his unresponsive eye that was closing on its own. "He's fine other than a concussion. Sakura gets worse beatings than this when she tumbles down the stairs." Sakura whispered, "Only when you push me, Shisho." The Hokage asked her, "What was that?" And the girl squeaked and went silent, signaling that her lips were locked and zipped shut. "I thought so. Looks like someone gets to clean out the fecal matter lab tonight." Jiraiya scratched his chin. "I can't say I remember this one from the last batch," as he examined Hinata Kun's muscular but unconscious body, his sword gone somewhere in the explosion. "I mean, he stands out, yeah. Looks a bit like a Sarutobi, when you think of it." Tsunade said, in a hushed voice, "He's Hyuga through and through," as Sakura and Naruto gathered around the desk as well. She pretended to have just noticed the 2 score guards who had hurried to her side and said, "You guys are here. Go do whatever it is you guys do when you're not fussing over me like you're trying to be my mother." "Well, there's no danger or anything so, shoo." Hokage Sama. They saluted solemnly and winked out of existence before returning to standing guard, sharpening their knives, and intimidating onlookers who gathered at the base of the Hokage Tower to witness the commotion. In one case, one of them returned to her phone and resumed playing Fruit Ninja on the balcony. As Jiraiya reached for a pen and notebook to model a new protagonist for his next big hit, his hands moved to a pouch at his hip and he said, "He's sort of handsome, isn't he?" He would describe it as Aika Aika Aikizoku, and genius, and the protagonist of the tale would be a young man named Shishi. Shishi and his travels across the country with his perverted talking dog, Naru-chan, his flirtatious maid, and his tenacious sidekick, Sabaton. Wonderful. Arson appreciation conventions would be a great place to sell this. While Shizune, Sakura, and even Naruto sighed in agreement with the sage, Tsunade observed, "I don't get it. He was too busy planning another bestseller to notice. The whole tall, dark and buzzcut thing. That's what I don't get. Shizune half-heartedly reprimanded, "Oh, shut your mouth, Tsunade." Sama, feeling the muscles in the young man's midriff. All she wanted to know was whether it was real. Additionally, if they were. No, firmly slapped Tsunade's apprentice's hand away. When Shizune whimpered at her like an unfed puppy, she muttered, "Bad Shizune. Bad. Naughty. Where's my atomizer bottle when I need it? He's 16, pedophilia, much?" Shizune objected, "There's nothing wrong with looking." "Oh, isn't there? That fact that he's about 20 years younger than you doesn't make it wrong? The fact that he's jailbait doesn't make it wrong? The fact that you reduce him to nothing but an object based on his physical attractiveness doesn't make it wrong?" Before an idea came to her, the mistress of poisons reluctantly started to confess, "Well, when you say it like that. Hey, Sakura. Chan and Naruko. Chan are also drooling over him, but they don't get scolded." Sakura was, quite rightly, drooling and a little wet as she drummed absently at the desk, while Naruko was enjoying herself by gently snickering to herself and jabbing the likely brain damaged boy in the cheek with the tip of her finger. She stared for a long time at the final Uzumaki heiress, who raised her head at her and cocked it to the side in confusion at the attention. They're 16. They wouldn't know what to do with a man if they so were given an instruction manual and a map of his erogenous zones. "You obviously have some stuff going on. Is it some sort of badly worded PMS or hysteria metaphor, or?" She eagerly explained the situation, saying, "Arrow. Senin had the idea of doing this nature release training to improve the Rasengan or something, and he handed me a paper, said it was supposed to be cut or crumble or." Page 1. Tsunade waved her on, saying, "Chakra-sensitive paper. Yeah, we get it. What happened then?" She threw her arms wide, knocking the notepad out of her perverted teacher's hands. He complained and dove after it without even pausing for breath, as if he was accustomed to it by now. "Well, I channeled chakra into it like he told me to, but for the longest time it didn't do anything. Then, all of a sudden, whoosh," she exclaimed. "It goes up in a flash of light and smoke. My entire face got plastered with soot. Turns out it got Raiden and Doden all at the same time. I've got #the power, ya know?" Tsunade questioned. "Dat power," Naruko responded with a triumphant cry. "Ha! I made you say it. #Sly Fox. #Rokudame. #Naruko FTW." Tsunade asked her assistant, "Huh?" And she quickly rolled her eyes. "It's a social media thing. You know, the reason why young people have phones. You should really get a profile on LeafNet, Naruko. Chan is quite the avid and prolific user." Naruko gleefully added, "You gotta start building your power base somewhere, right? Anyway, so that's how we discovered that I had this Bakuten thing. Atbao. Arrow. Senin didn't know what the hell to do at first, ya know? He was looking up and down my family tree, went around all over the country, did these deep examinations of my chakra." Sage said sharply, glancing up from his notebook for a moment, "Which means I put a couple of seals on her and examined how her chakra reacted to them. It was nothing dirty, you all should know. No matter how glibly the brat phrases it." A sudden suggestion from Naruko that maybe the heroine has a dark past caused the author's eyes to pop open, his mouth to start salivating fervently, and his pen to practically glow as he jotted down notes in his tiny pad. That should keep him busy for about another hour or so. As I was about to say, he found Jack Dosh. Nada. Shilch. So he came up with the idea of teaching me some sage stuff in order to stabilize my chakra, because whenever I use it, she acted like an explosion. That didn't work either. By now I can basically point at a direction and make something explode, but usually not the thing I meant to explode. It's either too weak or too strong or too general or too narrow or doesn't work at all, and that's after almost a year of training. As the girl stopped to catch her breath, Tsunade asked, "What's the problem?" Her serious tone was interrupted by Kakashi, who was standing to the side and had started to giggle softly. "It's just too unstable, if that makes any sense. As soon as I try to shape it or move it, kaboom," she said. "What's up, Kakashi sensei?" He tittered, like a schoolgirl who had just used a profanity for the first time. "You're literally a blonde bombshell." "Ha," said Jiraiya absently. "Good one." Rolling her eyes, Naruko said, "Ha ha, very funny, sensei." To her former instructor. "It's not like that's the most obvious bloody joke in the history of anything." Sakura asked her friend and teammate, "Since when did you become so sarcastic?" But all she received was a shrug. "Oh," she said, looking down as Hinata started to move. She was right when she said, "He's waking up." The Hyuga heir blinked awake. his head feeling as though it had been trapped inside the main bass drum at a rock concert. He blinked to discover a plated ceiling above him as he slowly drifted awake, his vision swimming and 1,000 clocks ringing in his ears. "Wha?" he asked, confused and dazed, and turned his head to the right, only to see a stunning bosom leaning in his direction while wearing a black crop top. Perfectly tanned skin framed the black fabric, which was rough and harshly cut as if it had been cut from a larger garment. However, underneath, it appeared to be disturbed by some covering steel. Mesh net under armor. In fact, it was one of the most amazing things he had ever seen, as her bosom swayed gently with her breathing and the two heavy breasts moved within the top just a little out of sync with one another. He questioned whether he had been sent to paradise or if the previous blast had truly killed him. Tsunade spoke pityingly, "With the way your body has been changing, this was inevitable." She put an arm around Naruko's shoulder as he looked down at the Hyuga boy with an indignant blush, while Hinata had his eyes fixed on her chest and a tiny trickle of drool was streaming down his lips. "Believe me, I've been there with you. Now, there are a few things you could do. Though I prefer to just make them stop their leering with surgically applied violence." As Hinata drooled more at the sight of her chest, Naruko hitched her voice and said, "No, he's hurt enough." "Maybe," she said, her blushing discomfort abruptly replaced by a cunning smile. "Maybe," and she acted. Hinata protested, "Wah?" as the heavenly bosom appeared to move. He was about to curse the nearby god who had taken it away when he felt as though his head, which was dizzy and full of cotton and hurt, was raised to rest against something soft but somewhat springy. He sighed in satisfaction as it gave way beneath his head, calming, warm, and oh so delightful. He looked up to see a pair of sparkling blue eyes and a hand resting on his forehead. "Hold on, Naruko. Chan." And then his head was on her. On. "It is imperative that you avoid fainting at all costs," she asked in a sweet voice. "Daishobu, Hinata-kun," as she gently rubbed his dust-streaked brow until it was clear and as pale as ever. "My technique got sort of out of hand. Atbeo. I really did not mean to hurt you." As she whispered in his ear just for him, her voice fell a few notes. "I'd do anything to make it up to you." Was she implying, "It is imperative that you avoid fainting at all costs"? However, no, indeed. Gods yes. "Oh, it is imperative that you avoid fainting at all costs. The lights are out, so there's no chance." As he moved away from his former pupil to the side of the corrupted sage, Kakashi remarked, "And he fainted. Is she learning to weaponize her sexuality?" "Ancestors help us all," Jiraiya said sourly, his face pallid as he watched the boy fall to the tabletop unconscious, while Naruko watched with a hint of mischief as she pulled away from the boy. She nodded to herself and muttered, "That'll teach him." Tsunade shook her head disapprovingly, asking, "Will it, really? Sex? Positive actions only serve to reinforce the notion of yourself as overtly sexualized. If you want to empower yourself, a swift boff across the bonds is a much better way." Sakura asked, grabbing both of the blonde's attention, "Are you two saying that violence and sex are the only ways a woman can be empowered? That's more than just a little disturbing on its own, not to mention quite fucked up." Tsunade quickly corrected herself, then glanced around, saying, "We can debate feminism later in the chapter. I mean later today. I will need to get some carpenters and masons in here. Or alternatively that Mokuton fellow with the stupid face guard. And Naruko-chan." The older woman blushed as the blonde girl drew lead. "Yes, mommy?" She looked sternly around the table and said, "You, should get reacquainted with the village while I try to figure out what the hell to do with you. Meet me at training ground 15 around 6 o'clock, and I expect all of y'all to be there." The young girl who was the main recipient of her brief speech nodded enthusiastically. "Kakashi, I'll put some healing on this lad, but then you take him back to his apartment, alright? Put him in his bed and tuck him in nice and tight because he needs plenty of bed rest after this." "Yes, ma'am." He nodded and hesitated to salute as Tsunade placed a chakra glow hand on the young man's brow, causing a few uncontrollable movements of his body before she finished. Like Tsunade had done previously, Kakashi once lifted Hinata over his shoulder like a bag of spuds before he quickly disappeared by jumping out the window. From then on, there was little conversation as Tsunade called forth her guards and began barking orders like a drill sergeant who had been forced to transform into a St. Bernard's. For another 3 hours, Shizune was left to talk to the perverted sage while he continued to sketch out character outfit designs, while Sakura and Naruko were left to do as they pleased. Naturally, they proceeded to greet their friends, but not before Naruko spotted a gleaming brass object in the debris of the corridor outside the Hokage's office. She marveled at its craftsmanship as she picked it up and brushed the dust off of it. "This thing is kind of cool," she thought as she slung the sword and scabbard that Hinata had dropped over her shoulder. As they walked through the streets of Konoha, Ino made dramatic hand gestures to emphasize what she was saying to the others, drawing few attention despite their odd attire. So then I said to him, the presence of a red, white 10 next to Sakura in a red outfit, Ino in a purple garb, and Naruko in a black orange outfit wasn't particularly strange because young shinobi, and Kunoichi in particular, had a tendency to dress strangely. Living in a shinobi village quickly made you accustomed to practically anything. With a casual smile on her face, Sakura begged her friend, please tell me you let him down easy. Once the Sasuke craze had subsided, it was nice to have Ino as a friend once more. Ha! Scoffing, the Yamanaka answered. No, duh, I told his civilian self to go stick a marrow up his butt. I didn't even know him and he was trying to grab my behind like some sort of caveman. Disgusting. 10 made the almost cautious observation, he did say that he loved you while he did it. As they went, Naruko told her girlfriends, guys like him are bottom feeders and will do or say anything to get into a woman's trousers. Believe me, I trained with the champion of their kind. As they rounded a corner and made their way to the training grounds on the outskirts of town, Sakura asked, Jiraiya, Sama didn't do anything weird to you, right? I mean, he's pretty perverted, so to speak. While the other girls pondered why she was carrying Hinata's sword, Naruko pondered for a short time. I got the feeling he considers me more of a granddaughter than a woman. Which is great, because otherwise it would have been weird, not to mention extremely uncomfortable. But other than using me as a reason to follow along into the women's baths at the onsen and have a peep. Nothing perverted, no. Ino started to inquire, did he ever mention if he and Tsunade, Sama ever? Sakura yelled, Ino.pig. What the hell? Don't ask things like that about the Hokage, in clear protest. What? I'm just asking. We've all been wondering if he used to stick it to her or not. Sakura also grumbled, do you have to be so uncouth about it? At least say, make love. She boldly stated, no, I think sticking it is exactly what Jiraiya, Sama does, but she was also flushed. Their empty tittering was just that, empty, because none of them had any experience with the carnal ways, particularly with regard to the opposite sex. I don't think so, was Naruko's conclusion after giving it careful thought. But, I don't think it matters. Maybe she's the only one who's ever turned him down, but regarding how many times he gets powerbombed on a daily basis I doubt it's something as cliché as that. Maybe she's the only woman he's ever loved for real, or maybe it's just games and he sees her like a sister. From a distance, 10 added, it's what he does to his sisters, then EHW, to which the other young ladies agreed. Could we please talk about something else that's less disturbing? Ino started to count on her fingers. So there's Naruko, Chan, Hokage, Sama, and myself, she said. Kamachi-san, and Anbu I think works in the demolitions unit, and Futaba, Chan in Konohamaru, Kun's class. That traitor Hikui who left the village 5 years ago. Sakura asked her childhood friend, are you listing all the blondes in Konoha? Well, yeah, was the instant answer. And there's that chick with the glasses who works in the archives, and Namikaze Shida, you know, the one that works for the astronomy division, the one with the heart-shaped hairdo? 10 contributed from the side, assisting Ino in adding 2 more to the total, saying, not to mention your father and Sakura's mom. The others gave her a blank look when Sakura asked, aren't you forgetting the big one? Look, she exclaimed, extending her arm to indicate the face etched into the rock of the far-off Hokage mountain, which was situated between the Sandames and her masters. Yondaime was blonde too, right? Ino gave herself a forehead slap and said, I almost forgot. It's so hard to remember that Yondaime was an actual person sometimes, you know? He did all of that crazy stuff and then died so young. I can't picture him drinking sake or buying groceries or having a wife and kids. I just can't. I try to imagine it, but no, she raised her hands in the air. She were saying, my mind's blank, diaresis. He was probably one of those career type people, like Kakashi Sensei, said Naruko. I mean, the guy's totally my idol, but he didn't have time for a family, I think. Probably too focused on his awesome job to even consider dating. Naturally, none of them realized the true tragedy of that statement. Speaking of dating. Sakura wondered right away, I thought you said you didn't need a boyfriend. I don't, Naruko said, flushed. She defended herself almost frantically, saying, it's not like that, okay. I'm just curious and all. So, does Hinata.kun have a girlfriend? She wondered if she should tell anyone or if he was breaking his vow of loyalty to some poor girl after he had been leering at her earlier. Joking with him was enjoyable, but... What? 10 objected. Not you too, Don't tell me you've got the hots for him. Well, he's kind of cute, she grudgingly acknowledged. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go on a shopping spree at Meisho's Secret and find the sluttiest knickers. Brassiere combo they have in orange, she said. Just because I. Ino interrupted her friend and said, you know, I thought you were batting for the other team for the longest while. Naruko, who frequently disregarded metaphors, pondered, batting for the other team, what do you mean? Ino said, you know, with a suggestive wiggle of her eyebrows, you being a agent of imperialism. Interested in wheelbarrows, 10 said glibly. Sakura appeared to explain, we did suspect you were a skirt lifter as well, since you were always a tomboy. Ino smiled and said, a West End thespian warm sister who rides a three-wheeled bike. 10 added, a vaginator that's on the other buses, as it were. Wait. Naruko turned to face each of them. I understand Sakura thinking I was gay, because that's what you're all saying, right? But all of you? I mean, what the hell, guys? 10 rushed to add, not that there would have been anything wrong with you if you were. Just, you were always asking Sakura-chan on dates and didn't seem even the slightest interest in Sasuke-kun. When Ino forced her way back into the conversation, Naruko went mildly green in the face. Even though you were his first kiss, she exclaimed. What? She muttered ominously, I'd rather not be reminded of that. Thank you very much, and made an effort to return to the topic at hand before her positive attitude was destroyed. For the last time. I'm not gay. So. Does Hinata-kun have a girlfriend? 10 sulked glumly as they got closer to Training Ground 15, an open earthen field with stone fences and rocks of various sizes that was typically reserved for explosive kunai practice. He's a dick. As Sakura waved to the small group of Tsunade, Jiraiya, Kakashi, and Shizune who were waiting in the center of the field, Ino cheekily smiled and said, she's just bitter because he turned her down after she confessed to him, and if anyone's gay, it's him. Sakura explained from a distance, he's 16 and has never even shown interest in a girl. And no guy ever pays that much attention to his appearance. Could you kids stop talking about damn Boyzone for one bloody second? The roar said, cutting them off mid-sentence and casting them in front of an irritated Hokage. And you're supposed to be Kunoichi? Shizune turned to Jiraiya, who was contentedly but idly drawing on his next bestseller to the side and didn't seem to care much about anything. Isn't this supposed to be a more feminist piece of fanfiction? Shizune asked. All they've done so far is talk about boys. This certainly wouldn't pass the Bechdel test. In the same low voice as the Hokage's assistant, the frog hermit shrugged and said, well, maybe it needs to hit its stride before it starts preaching. And besides, they're young and pretty new at this. Teenagers aren't generally bastions of progressiveness, are they? Fair point. Shizune nodded in agreement as the Hokage asked loudly why all the hangers-on were with Naruko. With a whiny, come on, ma, she threw her arms over Ten's and Ino's shoulders while pouting teasingly. They're my girls, I gotta be allowed to bring my girls, right? The Hokage retorted, it's their own fault if they get themselves blown up, and angrily motioned for Naruko to leave the group and stand in the exact middle of the field, facing away from them as though to demonstrate her possessions. Now, do your techniques. Jutsu? Asked Naruko, cocking his head, while Tsunade gazed at the now sighing Jiraiya with increasing annoyance. He cautiously added, we haven't actually gotten far enough for actual techniques, Tsunade-chan, aware that he was stepping on thin ice with his former teammate. He shook his head, put his notebook away, and turned to face his apprentice. All she has to do to make things blow up is barely think about reaching for that chakra, and then, he said. Show them, wouldn't ya, Naruko-chan? Yosh! She exclaimed, nodding before turning to face north and extending her hands in front of her, away from the group that was now safely behind her. In a matter of seconds, she could hear tiny popping noises coming from her fingertips as smoke sizzled and rose from them in tiny, sulfur-scented strands that were quickly scattered by the new spring breeze that blew through the air. Sputters, hisses, and snaps preceded a string of loud bangs until Jiraiya commanded her to stop. He told Tsunade, we've tried everything I could think of, and her expression, which was now frowning, was a mix of thoughtfulness and concern. But as soon as she tries to move it or mold it, her chakra explodes. Training her to separate lightning chakra from earth chakra leads nowhere since, ya know, kaboom, and it reacts poorly to seals as well. As ashamed as I am to admit it, I've got no clue as what to do next. Kakashi.san. Tsunade turned to face the white-haired pervert who was reading the most recent Icha Icha series entry in silence. You've any ideas as what to do with this? You are our resident ninjutsu expert, after all. After giving a serious nod, Kakashi closed his book, turned to face his former pupil, and went to work. He made her perform exercises, motions, and moves that seemed to have no logical purpose whatsoever for hours on end. He would ask her how she felt and watch her every time she made a small technique or stance change, no matter how slight. His good eye narrowed in the daylight as he worked and watched from every angle. His headband occasionally lifted to show a crimson Sharingan whirling frantically in his other, rarely seen eye as he studied her chakra flows in greater detail. The way Minato, Kun's only remaining student, got down to the basics of ninjutsu practice impressed Jiraiya, who was watching absently from the proverbial stands. Since he himself had no idea what to do next, it couldn't hurt to have another pair of eyes on the situation, could it? As the hours passed, the sky grew darker on the horizon in the distance as dusk approached. At that point, Kakashi nodded and allowed Naruto, who was now sweating and extremely irritated, to stop the seemingly meaningless movements and exercises. His Hokage instructed him to report, and like a good little soldier, he did just that. Her chakra is, for lack of a better term, unstable, Hokage. Sama. Explosive and highly reactive, like glyceryl trinitrate, nitroglycerin. And so I suspect she must learn to use her chakra not through conventional techniques but through less subtle manners of directing it. HMPH, was Jiraiya's low moan. Didn't even consider that. Stupid sexy Kakashi. Tsunade reprimanded, seemingly automatically, fresh eyes and everything, pervert, before turning back to Kakashi. So you suggest that she goes about it another way, her own way, since no one in this village has any idea of how to teach her, he replied. Other than that, perhaps it is better to treat her chakra just like nitroglycerin. It might become more stable if you allow it to soak into a grounding stabilizer of an element. Perhaps a sulfuric clay or alkalescent liquid, or even a reactionary gas or silicate. Potassium dust. Tsunade rubbed her eyes in exasperation and then pinched the bridge of her nose to clarify. Your point is that we need either material or lots of time. And both require more training. You know this is pretty disappointing. I thought with the technique from before I would get to see stuff blown up. With an almost sheepish grin on her face and a hint of red in her whiskered cheeks, Naruto scratched the back of her head and said, well, I'm still trying out techniques and stuff. The adult onlookers thought she looked adorable. Sorry if I fooled y'all. Gamine. But in my defense, Shakaho sounds pretty damn awesome. In an almost maternal tone, Tsunade extended a hand for the young woman to take, saying, then save it for an actual technique later on, baby girl. Come now. Let's go home. Reaching up to finger the hilt of the sword draped over her shoulders, Naruto asked, can that wait a while? I kinda got something I need to get back to someone. Atbeo. When Hinata woke up, his ears were ringing. When he wasn't paying attention to it, it faded into the background noise of the world, but whenever he thought of it, it rushed to the forefront and wouldn't go away until his focus shifted elsewhere. There were two types of it. A continuous tune, a high-pitch ringing dully in his inner ears. The other type of ringing, which sounded almost like someone ringing his, occurred at erratic intervals in a melodic sequence. He woke up in his bed, clutching his aching head, wondering how he had gotten home from the Hokage's office after it exploded and where his clothes had gone. That ringing wasn't the sound of his brains getting back to normal after being reduced to mush. It was his doorbell. He stumbled through his apartment, wearing only his pants, bleary-eyed, distracted, and almost completely devoid of any coherent thoughts. He grabbed firmly at the soon unlocked door. His worst nightmares came to life when he threw open the door. She smiled and said, good morning, stud. Muffin.kun, before her eyes widened when she saw him standing in front of her wearing only his pants. She remarked with delight, you're going to get a reputation, mate, if you greet everyone at the door like this. He managed to stammer out, Naruto-chan, while pleading with the spirits of his ancestors to cause him to melt through the floor at that very moment. Hi. He looked down at his nearly nude body and clutched his hands in front of his boxer-clad crotch in a frantic panic, wondering what the devil had done to him. He had to pay the piper, even though he had clearly not been thinking when he had gone to answer the door wearing only his underwear. She smiled as he blushed so much that his face was almost navy blue. Well, that answers the question of boxers or briefs somewhat drastically, I would say, she continued. She was a little sweaty, with rebellious strands of blonde hair plastered against her brow, and the rapidly fading darkness outside did nothing to improve her complexion, but he still thought she looked like an angel out of heaven, despite her apparent tendency toward schadenfreude when it came to him. May I come in? Oh, she, in his apartment? Such a reality was too wonderful and too terrible to even consider, so he must have been dreaming. He stepped to the side and showed her in without making any kind of gesture, managing to stammer out, "S." Sure, through that damned blockage of a brick in his mouth known as a tongue. He liked to keep things neat, tidy, and carefully organized, so his place was sufficiently clean. He hurried to his dresser as soon as he closed the door after her. Mind if I get dressed? As he was turned away, she shrugged and took a long look at his ass. Go right on ahead. I had to ask a whole bunch of people for directions before I actually found out you lived here. Ya no. She replied as she surveyed the space. My old flat is in this building too. 1 floor up, 3 doors down and exactly mirror. Inverted so it was. I wonder who lives there now. As he put on a pair of gray sweatpants and a huge black hoodie with the Konoha swirl on the back in red, Hinata remarked, some guy who owns a cabbage stand. The hoodie was so loose on his body that he didn't even bother zipping it up more than halfway, as he usually does when he's just stumbling around the flat. He says he's from Kei's no Kuni, says that he quite enjoys the weather here. Right, she said with a somewhat dejected shrug before recalling her purpose for being there. She took the sword off her shoulders, baldric and all, and gave it to the young man, who accepted it with a bow and a formal expression of thanks. Yeah, Kakashi. Sensei forgot to bring your sword or whatever after the whole explosion thing, so I brought it, she said. No need to be so formal. Atbeo. I mean, it looks pretty fancy, so I thought you might want it back. He swallowed hard and bowed again, saying, Tea. Thank you nevertheless, Naruko. Chan. Would you like a cup of tea? Can I offer you anything? She smiled back at him. I could go for a cuppa. He blushed briefly in return, then turned to the kitchenette at the back of the apartment and put the kettle on to boil while Naruko surveyed the space. So, where do you get the sword? She asked, glancing at the bookshelves that were arranged beside the bed in the studio apartment's bedroom area. Many of the books were about fencing, acupuncture, swordwork, poetry, and flower pressing. With his back to the young woman, Hinata missed her examination of his possessions. Asuma. Sensei and Shikamaru-san got it for me. He adjusted the blade's hilt, which was now slung over his shoulder, in a way that he found most reassuring. Asuma. Sensei H. has quite a few weapons like these laying around. He says he likes to keep the weapons of the powerful people he's beaten. At the foot of the bookshelves, Naruko noticed something slightly out of place. A corner of a magazine that was barely visible, protruding from under it. Like Lee-kun and the martial arts school signs he got plastered all over his walls. She asked herself, what kind of sword is it, anyway? A Yanmadao, a goose. Quill saber, was Hinata's description as he searched his cabinets for the chocolate biscuits he knew he had purchased the day before. It's a weapon that more common further west, in the lands beyond Tsuchi and Kei's no Kuni. It's like a dao, a heavy saber, but more slender and less bulky, making it more suited for thrusting and piercing blows like a straight sword. Since the Jien, the slender straight sword from the same region, is the customary weapon of the Hyuga main family, and the dao is better suited to the Goken, I got a hybrid of the two, just like my new fighting style. As he rambled and started to pour up tea until he stopped, he placed a few cups on a tray and spread the biscuits out on a plate with them. As he geeked out about swords, Naruko was silent and made no effort to interrupt him or shift the conversation to something more enjoyable. Worried that he was boring her, he turned, but when he saw what Naruko was holding, his soul went cold and his heart was seized with panic. The magazines Naruko had found were manga of the most overtly pornographic kind, as there were probably a number of them concealed beneath the bookshelf's frame to ensure no one saw them. To one, they all appeared to be regularly read by the worn staples that held them together, and they all included Gyaru women, who were tan and blonde and frequently blunt and direct, a style that had become increasingly popular among the country's youth in the past 10 years. Beyond that, it was fairly typical for a guy his age, she wrote absently as she turned the pages, her mind not functioning as it should have. No raping or gang bang stuff. No strange animal stuff other than the occasional girl wearing a cat-ear headband. No netarare fetish like the one arrow. Seinen went on and on about, just plain old vanilla sex, occasionally with anal included. A single side panel of one of the magazines showed a stylized image of sperm burrowing into an ovulated egg during the act of conception. She stopped at the last pages and saw one of the women, after a sex session that was undoubtedly impossible in reality, lying prone on the floor with a blissful smile on a sweaty face. Naruko swallowed hard and closed that magazine, flushed. How was one supposed to respond when they found themselves alone in an apartment with a boy who had lewd material showing women like you getting pregnant? When Hinata made the decision for her, she was in extreme discomfort and contemplating whether or not to jump out of the window. He exclaimed, "Kya," in a silent, nearly inhuman cry of shame and panicked embarrassment as he rushed through his apartment, ripped the erotic manga from her hands, clutched them to his chest, and ran out the door before throwing them off the overpass and scattering them in the air. Before any of the magazines had even touched the floor, he rushed back inside and slammed the door behind him. He was panting, leaning his back against the door, praying that it was all a nightmare, and his eyes were closed as his heart pounded more forcefully than ever. His face was concealed from her by his hands as he sagged and slid down the door until he was sitting flush with the floor. Never in his life had he felt so ashamed. "I take it you're not gay, no matter what the girls say," she said in a voice that was equal parts amused, shocked, and perplexed. He wanted to cry and moaned into his hands. Well, this is awkward. Please leave." He was on the verge of tears, feeling like a plastic bag or a wrung-out rag, as if all he was worth was a thin shell enclosing a lot of wasted space. He didn't want her to see him that way, so he said, "Just, damn it all. Anybody but her." "Hey." A hand found his wrist, exposing his eyes to her gentle smile. Unsure of what to do, she did what she always did and assured him that everything would be okay by wearing a smile that was both funny and encouraging. "It's all right. Settle down. No reason to panic about a couple of porno mags, okay? It's so embarrassing." He covered his face once more until she persuaded him to change his mind. "Everyone jerks it," she warned, her gentle smile turning to a wry one. "I mean, it doesn't mean anything, does it? You just feel the urge and then you either ignore it or you don't, right? Everyone gets frustrated. Me too." And now that specific mental image was almost overwhelming his already brittle mental state and bringing his sanity to an end, he was on the edge of fainting. "So, she continued only slowly, "maybe I shouldn't have been the one to find your boner kindling, but hey, it's my fault for poking around in the first place. Not my place to judge. Everyone's got their preferences, and one man's kink is another man's vanilla." Of course, it wasn't nearly as easy or straightforward for her to say as she made it seem. On the inside, she didn't know up from down and was only occasionally relying on arrow sentence stock phrases. What was the appropriate response to such a circumstance? "So, no worries, right?" She seemed to be feeling bad, even though his eyes were still misted and his cheeks were still making their best red chili pepper impression. "Please don't cry just because you threw away your porn." He bowed his head in a sitting bow and said, I'm sorry for being such a pervert." She waved her hands fervently from side to side in response. "Nonsense. I trained with the worst of them. You don't prance about like a ponce with a pair of used panties on your head like the world's worst Power Ranger, right?" He quickly shook his head. He shook his head once more, a little harder this time, and asked, "And you don't peep on actual women in the bath or the onsen, right?" Aside from the fact that all of the women in the stories resembled her, none's the worry. And there wasn't any weird stuff in there, was there? That was messed up in and of itself. As she attempted to reassure the young man, she made a mental note to watch out for stalkers. For such an obsession was pure and simple unhealthy. In response to all of that, he said, "I'm sorry, Naruko-chan," and when she offered to help him get back up, he took her hand. They eventually drank tea together, and Naruko made an effort to strike up a conversation, but naturally, following such an incident, things were awkward beyond repair. She left him half an hour later, blushing, and wishing him a restful night's sleep. Little did she know that he began to gently bang his head against the wall next to his bed as soon as she was gone. Meanwhile, Naruko traveled to her new residence. Since Tsunade and a few distantly related relatives now made up the majority of the clan and lived in different wings of the complex, the Senju compound was much larger than it actually needed to be. In order to boost village morale, the Hokage converted the majority of the compound into a gambling den and bar. She also relocated her living quarters to the old guest house, which was connected to the west wing by a lengthy walkway that was surrounded by trees. In the past, the Shoden used his now famous Kekkei Genkei to construct numerous guest houses in a matter of minutes, including this one. Naruko thought about her legacy as she crept around the back of the gambling parlor and headed to the front of the Senju house, a three-story traditional-style building centered around a single grand room just past the entrance hall where a Kanara tree grew in perpetual and eternal bloom despite weather and adversity. Yes, it would make a difference. That kind of bloodline ability is rare in the world, and it would greatly impact her surroundings. Her teachers didn't seem to mind. In fact, from what she could tell, they were oddly cool with the whole thing. Really, it was strange. Well, what might have happened if they hadn't been? Did Tsunade collapse under the strain of managing the fallback brought about by such a new and potent addition to the village's fighting capabilities as well as the alteration of the political structure? After what he saw as a lifetime of mistakes and regrets, is Kakashi defending Naruko and her position in the village in order to make amends with himself? Was Hinata forced into a power struggle too soon after the village was split apart in civil war by Naruko's newfound influence as a wild factor in the game of clans? As she removed her sandals in the entryway and made her way to the central rotunda room, Naruko snorted. That would have been foolish for anything to occur. She exclaimed, "I'm home." The building's central chamber, which intersected all 3 floors and had stairs that circled from floor to floor in an upward pointing spiral, was surrounded by the other rooms. "Where is everyone?" Someone called out, "Yo-hoo," as one of the second-story sliding doors opened, and Shizune emerged onto the balcony, bending over the oaken rail to greet Naruko below. "Come up, will you, Naruko-chan? All your friends are here." Ignoring the stairs like a true kunoichi, Naruko jumped up onto the balcony and followed Shizune into the adjacent room. The sitting room was dominated by a large, unnecessary television, a plethora of mismatched love seats, an armchair, and a particularly distressingly green sofa on which the Hokage was sitting sloughed while 3 young women appeared to be arguing around her. "What?" Naruko asked. "You guys," the blonde joyfully cried. Ino and Ten waved from other seats as Sakura smiled over the top of her teacup from a pink and white checkered armchair. "We thought it was alright if we came over to say hi and welcome home." Shizune entered a connected kitchen and brought out a kettle of hot water and a basket full of instant ramen cups. "But you weren't here, so." "Sorry," Naruko said, starting to prepare her meal with a growling stomach and drooling as she filled a cup with chicken flavored divine goodness. "I went to see Iruka Sensei first, and then I swung by Ichiraku Ramen, and then I went by Hinata Kun's place to drop off the sword Kakashi. Sensei forgot earlier today. Things sort of got in the way." Ten started to say, "That's all right," before the young woman appeared with 2 orange plastic chopsticks that seemed to appear out of nowhere and started gorging on noodles and broth with ravenous gusto, making noises like a rhinoceros swallowing an industrial vacuum packer. Sakura sighed slightly and said, "You're not getting any more out of her now, Chan." They then returned to their conversation from before the blonde bombshell showed up. "As I was saying," Ino started to object, carrying on a previous argument. "Why do Ten and I have to be the medics and support in our squad? I can be just as good on the defensive as Shikamaru and just as violent as Choji, you know." Ten pressed angrily, "Yeah. Why can Neji be the medic in my team? He's the one with any good chakra control since I fight with weapons and Lee's. Well, Lee, he doesn't do subtle." Tsunade went easily, saying, "Ino-chan, you're better at distance. Broody and Chubby in your team have to be on the middle distance and melee range respectively for the whole flower card trick thing to work." "Yeah, but think on it. Every time there's a medic or support specialist on the teams it's unfailingly a girl, right? Sakura, me, Ten, Hinata." As Sakura protested, "Hinata is not a girl. Yeah? He's the most feminine member of his team. I bet you money, actual money, Ten, I'm not letting you fool me into taking Monopoly Cash again, that if Naruko-chan was a boy then Hinata.kun would have been a girl just for the sake of cosmic balance." "Huh?" Naruko raised her head and blinked, not paying attention because she was too busy consuming her 4th cup of instant ramen and smearing broth across her whiskered cheeks. Tsunade quickly shot back, "That relegation is because of your skills, not because of your gender. That's not being sexist and saying women should get out of the fighting and into the kitchen. It's just allocating the right people to the right jobs." Ten persisted, asking, "Then why aren't we the right people for frontline fighting? I mean, Sakura is the most physically strong member of her team, yet she's relegated to the rear because she's not as good at fighting. We're all shinobi. Well, kunoichi, but same shit, different anus, right? We went through the same sort of schooling, the same sort of training as all the boys, but are we allowed to fight the same ways? No." Reflecting on those bygone days, Ino continued, "Did the teachers have any reason to teach us flower arranging in the academy? Or did they just didn't bother to teach us to fight as good as the boys? And, women do get paid less on average than men." Sakura remarked, "There are more men than kunoichi in the active military. I mean, maybe it's because it's a numbers game? Women in the workforce haven't gotten as much exposure to the public eye as men." "Pinky-chan, hurry up, Ten urged her friend. "It's not the Sengoku Jidai anymore. It's a new world, and just as many female cadets join the academy as male ones. A woman's Hokage, for crying out loud, and a woman's Mizukage too. This is an era of peace, well, sort of, and communication and things thought impossible before. We could have true and utter equality for everyone. It just doesn't make sense. A person shouldn't be treated differently just because they got tits. From a sideline, Ino said, or in Forehead's case, don't got any. From there, they quickly veered off topic, and the situation quickly became heated. The conversation eventually died down after Naruko finished her 8 cups of instant ramen, and they all turned away from her again because it was getting too late. As they stood looking at Naruko from the cushions of the sofa, love seat, and armchair, Ino proposed, "We were thinking of having a girls' night out. You want to come with? We could go celebrate your homecoming with a cake and rum or something." The other blonde responded with a nah shake of her head, leaving the others unprepared. "I'm kinda sleepy. Atbeo. It's been a really long day, ya know?" Tsunade turned to Shizune and said, "You girls go out and have fun." She was giving her a silent command to follow along and ensure that none of them caused any trouble. "I'll stay in with Naruko, help her get unpacked and sorted. None of you stay out past, oh, who gives a tosh? Just have fun and keep yourselves unhurt, yeah?" "Sure thing. 10. 10 grinned and made a V shape with her left hand to represent peace. Grinning, Ino added, "You guys get on that, then," and escorted them out of the living room. Sakura bowed and accompanied her friends, followed by a sighing but grateful Shizune. "Thank you, Shisho." After cleaning the room, Tsunade gave the girl a tour of the house. From Naruko's perspective, it appeared to be enormous. There was no space reservation because it was a guest house that was part of a compound that was completed before the village's boundaries were even clearly defined. With 3 rooms, a bathroom and toilet, and a small kitchen on each floor, it was nothing short of enormous in comparison to her studio apartment and the tents and hotel rooms she had slept in during her apprenticeship with the perverted sage. The ever-practical Hokage had set aside the majority of the rooms for either business or research. On the very top floor, however, one of the smaller chambers had been prepared for Naruko. It was a room that was dominated by a big bed, a bookcase, a room next to the room's osher that appeared to be a tiny walk-in closet but was actually a temporary armory, and a dresser for her clothing. Naruko went about removing her travel gear from the scrolls in the pouch on her hip while Tsunade settled into the bed's luxurious and startlingly orange covers. "Ka-san?" Naruko asked, her voice a bit lower than normal, while she was unpacking her socks into one of the dresser's drawers. "Why was Hinata-kun at the office today?" The older blonde sighed impatiently as she leaned back on the bed, looking at the bedroom ceiling and wondering which of her old relatives had once lived there. "He was doing what he does every single month," she said. "He moonlights at the hospital, did you know that? Outside of his teammates and a couple of others in your old class, he has basically no social life. Spends all his time training or working. And once a month he comes into my office, signs a transfer form and requests to be assigned to the Anbu. Every single time I deny it." She pondered, "Him? In the Anbu?" She assumed he was strong enough, but looks could be deceiving. "Why do you keep turning him down? Isn't he good for the job?" "Him? He's one of the most versatile shinobi we have now that the Uchiha Dick is no longer with us." "No, the problem's something else entirely." The Hokage rolled her eyes at Naruko as she turned away from unpacking and gave her adoptive mother a long look. "What? You think I'm so dumb that I would send out a Hyuga of the main family into the field without any precautions? If he gets captured or killed and his Byakugan harvested by our enemies, we would find ourselves deep in the shite. So no, I'm not letting him join the Anbu." Naruko started to suggest, then just placed some seals on. Tsunade interrupted, saying, "You know, I asked the same thing of Hiyashi. He said that he wouldn't sully his son and heir's power with seals that could potentially stymie his development. He said that the lad had to be at least 18 years of age before he could allow anything of the sort. You know, that's a bit I hate about this job. When it's not paperwork or the old farts on the council breathing down my neck, it's the clans making my supposedly awesome job a chore." Senju looked at the young woman differently as Naruko returned to unpacking the last of the grate. "Why do you keep asking about him? Did something happen between you two?" Thus, Naruko made the decision to violate the moment's implied secrecy and tell Tsunade everything that had transpired between them. Not surprisingly, the older woman started laughing. The younger woman sank down on her bed across from her adoptive mother and pouted, asking, "What's so funny? It's weird, if nothing else, he's acting like a bit of a creep." The Hokage laughed and took one whiskered cheek in each, pinching them as she smiled directly into Naruko's eyes. "Oh, my dear baby girl," she exclaimed. "You've really no idea, have you? He's always been head over heels in love with you." "What?" asked Naruko in a startled declaration. "It's true. The other girls are probably just trying to will reality into a different direction, but they know it too, as does everyone else who's ever seen the boy look at you. He doesn't creep on you. Well, maybe he does that too, but he adores you. You're the reason why he keeps pushing himself so hard." The only reason he wants to join the Anbu is so that he can become all strong and famous so that you will notice him. Well, was all Naruto could manage to say. She seemed to be experiencing the same intense need for attention and visibility as the rest of the village, but this time she was the one getting it, and she wasn't sure how to react. What should I do? I mean, I don't like him like that, not yet, anyway. He's cute and all, but you've hardly ever noticed him before he took off his frumpy sweater and showed that he had a bod you could bounce marbles off? Tsunade asked. For now, there's nothing you can do about it. Now you know he likes you. Loves you even. And for some people that's enough. The only thing some people want in a partner is that they love them, but not you, I suspect, and you have other things that are more important on your mind. Naruto asked, what should I do? Then, act like everything is normal. As they settled down on the bed, she put an arm around her new daughter's shoulders and said, you just come to me, alright? Ka-san will take care of it. Trust me, the last thing he wants is for you to shun him now. He's probably all hurt, ashamed, and confused right now, so acting just like before. Tease him, flirt with him. Just don't try to step on his feelings, okay? He's a nice boy and wouldn't hurt a fly. Thus, Tsunade caressed her infant daughter's hair tenderly until Naruto dozed off. She then got up, covered her with blankets, and left her in a dream world that was infinitely more complex than the real one, despite being far simpler. Across town, Hinata continued to pound his head against a hard object, this time the wooden disc of a bar, as the majority of his friends sat around him rather than the wall of his lonesome apartment. Kiba was furious at the idea and asked, she made her throw out your porn? Now that was uncalled for. He and Shino were seated at the bar, one of them speaking of Hinata, the other flanked by Neji, Shikamaru, and Shoji. Lee was the only boy not present because he had been permanently barred from all Konoha bars for reasons that are best kept quiet in polite company. He clearly did it on his own initiative, you annoying jerk, Shikamaru complained as he replenished Hinata's sake cup. Since they were shinobi, they were considered adults in the eyes of the law within the boundaries of Konoha, even though none of them were of legal drinking age without their parents' express permission or in public. Don't put words in his mouth. You know how he is with words. This is the worst day of my life. Hinata cried as he thumped his forehead against the bar's oaken surface and draped his arms over his head. She hates me now, she hates me. Speaking in comforting tones, Neji put an arm around his cousin's shoulders and said, don't take it so hard, brother. She isn't one to hold a grudge. Shoji asked rhetorically, have you met her? She holds grudges worse than that Uchiha prick, doesn't she always say that? Neji bared his teeth and snarled at the boy, you're not helping. The Akamichi heir immediately closed his mouth and remained silent. See, this might be a good thing. Now she has got to understand that you at least have feelings towards her. The cousin thought that perhaps that wasn't quite the right approach after hearing the young man in question groan loudly in mental agony. He hissed, Shino, pleading for assistance. If you had been emitting the right pheromones then she would have been yours already, Shino said with poise. Mating is very much a response to attraction, and judging by her actions she is not attracted to you other than superficially. Something I am sure she has gotten over by now. Ah! Exclaimed Hinata once more, slamming his head against the bar as Neji gazed at the Aburame heir with daggers. The bartender who kept the bar and strange patrons in the booths in the other areas of the small pub hydrated asked, you guys really suck at this, don't you? Shikamaru gave the man a long, grim look while he was busy cleaning and polishing a glass. Well, I'll just take my advice where it is wanted. Over the lull of the music and the dull conversations around them, Kiba muttered, civilian prick, after the elderly man had moved out of earshot and away from them. Well, there's plenty of fish in the sea, as they say, mate. Maybe you should just move on. Hinata turned his eyes towards him, glaring daggers from his pale and now emotionally deadened eyes, fixing him in his seat with a black stare. Kiba felt an icy hand clutch his heart with the intent to kill. The Hyuga heir called his friend blasphemy, before he turned to Shikamaru's poured drink and drank it all at once. Yup. Shoji shook his head too pityingly, he's got it for her, he's got it bad. Shikamaru dutifully asked, what else is new? Before raising his head to see two new shapes enter the bar. A group of 3 men, 2 of whom had pale white, gray hair and one of whom was tanned and had his hair pulled back in a ponytail. He sighed as he looked at his cup, but it was empty. Looks like it's the annual gathering of the Naruto's teacher's self. Congratulation Union, he muttered. Troublesome. Look, an enthusiastic voice exclaimed, and Hinata's shoulders were suddenly grabbed by 2 powerful, eager, and horribly calloused hands. See these shoulders here? Perfect protagonist material. He's made to be on the cover of novels, mark my words. Hinata objected, Jiraiya. Sama. As the perverted sage pulled him to his feet and made him spin around like a living mannequin to show his fellow Uzumaki Naruto teachers. What's going on? Speaking to the other two older men, Uruka. Sensei made a meaningful gesture to the boy and said, "Truly, you are correct, Jiraiya." Sama. His words were a little slurred due to his own inebriation. A mark of considerable prowess. I am very proud to have taught this boy. The other boys in his class were crap. Kiba and the others all yelled, "Hey!" with the exception of Shino, who simply fell into a quiet sulk. The Ermino teacher continued, "Well, it's true," as he sat down in the seat that Hinata had been ejected from. He displayed an inch between his index and middle fingers, which would normally be pinched together. This close to becoming Rookie of the Year. Great technical skills, theory. Brilliant. If only he was more outgoing and sure of himself, then perhaps he wouldn't have died and this Asuma lookalike would have taken his place, he said. Shino.kun lacks personality, and Neji also needs an urgent personality infusion, like, yesterday, and the rest of you were poor students. Shikamaru shook his head and beckoned the bartender to come over and order him another drink, saying, "Sensei is such a mean drunk." Kiba snarled, "Come on, Sensei," as he reached for his own sake cup. "What the hell? I mean, I get that you dislike the Uchiha traitor, but hey, you got to admit we've grown awesome over the years. You might even say that we're cabalicious." As Kakashi, frustrated by the antics involving the manchildren now under his care, came up and moved to address the now marginalized Hinata, Jiraiya grumbled, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." As he pulled the boy away from the two men he was essentially babysitting, Kakashi said, "Say, Hinata.kun, I have a proposition for you." I don't, do that, sort of thing. No matter what you've heard from Sakura. Chan, the young man stammered back after swallowing hard, Kakashi. Sensei. The Sharingan genius, who thought that Virgin Boy's innocence was boring, rolled his eyes in response. "Not that kind of proposition, you idiot." So, with Naruto Chan back in the village, the team is reforming. As you've no doubt guessed. We need one additional member, one with diverse skills. Naruto Chan is very much a heavy hitter, frontline, tank, face.to, foot and nuts.to, fist sort of fighter. Sakura Chan is more suited for a supporting role. Which means I find myself in need of a shinobi with a particular set of skills. Even though the implications of what was being said caused his cheeks to flush, the boy stammered back, I'm sorry, Kakashi. Sensei. I'm already on a team with Kiba and Shino, and I've been on it for years. And with as many times I've requested transfer already but have it denied." Kakashi urged Hinata to, "Look on your shoulder, kid," and unwrapped his jacket to reveal a tiny swirl of a design in black against his pale skin, resembling the whirlpool symbol found on everyone's uniforms. As Hinata watched, the seal gradually disappeared, settling into his flesh until it was entirely concealed from the outside world. He pointed to the man by the bar who was engaged in a ridiculous little dance while wearing a lampshade on his head and said, "I had a few ideas of how to draw it up, but the seal master over there took one look and went righty. Oh, an author and an artist. He is the true genius around here." Hinata's fingers were shaking as she touched his shoulder, wondering if it was real. Was this it, or what? Had it really been that easy, after all the time he'd been fighting for it? As the man he had referred to as a genius performed hip thrusts and sang a song full of suggestive references to bobsledding to the cheers of the entire bar, Kakashi explained, "It's quite the complicated seal that uses your own chakra to cast a small genjutsu mirage over itself, concealing it from most forms of normal scrutiny. It's a little more hard-core than the Hyuga cursed seal, though, instead of your eyes becoming regular ones or whatever happens, your eyes, along with most of your head, will literally explode if you die. So, he gave Hinata a pat on the back. Try not to get killed?" Hinata mumbled, "Why is that a question?" She was both a little scared and excited at the same time. Kakashi. Sensei, were you honest about your offer? Unseen behind his mask, the White Fang's son grinned and asked, "Do I need to spell it out for you? Let's make it official, then. Hinata.kun. Would you like to join Team Kakashi?"
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.